My mother-in-law emptied all the money from my bank accounts and ran away with her lover to live a life of luxury. I was completely heartbroken and devastated until my 7-year-old daughter looked up from her screen and said, "Mommy, do not worry about them because I handled it." 4 days later, my mother-in-law called me in an absolute panic, screaming and begging for mercy. My name is Natalie. I am 33 years old and I work as a cybersecurity consultant. Just a few short months ago, I lost my husband David to a sudden heart condition. My world shattered the day he died. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to stand up to family who underestimated your worth and tried to take advantage of your grief. I stood at the polished mahogany counter of the Chase Bank branch in downtown Seattle. The air conditioning in the building was freezing, but a cold sweat gathered at the back of my neck. I had only come in to transfer a small amount of money to pay for my daughter Lily and her upcoming school tuition. The bank manager Philip sat behind the glass looking at his computer monitor. He typed something on his keyboard and frowned. He typed again, and his face completely drained of color. He slowly took off his glasses and looked up at me with an expression of pure pity. He said, "Natalie, the $850,000 from your late husband life insurance trust is gone. It was wired out entirely this morning by the joint account holder, Brenda." I did not break down. I did not scream. I tightened my grip on the cold marble edge of the counter until my knuckles turned bright white. I stared at him and asked him to repeat what he had just said because it made absolutely no sense. Philip turned his screen slightly so I could see the glowing red numbers showing a balance of 0. He explained that a massive international wire transfer had been initiated at exactly 8 in the morning. My chest tightened as the memory from 2 weeks ago hit me like a physical blow. We were sitting in my living room surrounded by sympathy cards and half-eaten casseroles. Brenda sat on my couch sobbing uncontrollably, holding a framed picture of David. She told me she felt so helpless and disconnected from her son. She begged me to let her be a joint signer on the life insurance trust, just so she could feel like she was still part of his legacy and helping to secure her granddaughter's future. I was drowning in grief. I was so exhausted and vulnerable that I believed her crocodile tears. I signed the paperwork and added her name to the account because I wanted to keep the family together. I asked Philip how a transfer that large could go through without my direct authorization. He looked down at his desk and softly explained that because Brenda was a legally registered joint account holder, she had equal rights to the funds. She bypassed the security protocols by physically coming into another branch at opening time and signing the required release forms in person. She had planned this down to the very last detail. I thanked Philip quietly, picked up my purse, and walked out of the bank. The bright afternoon sun blinded me as I stepped onto the busy sidewalk. The noise of the city traffic faded into a dull buzz in my ears. The money was not just wealth. It was the absolute last thing David had left to ensure that Lily would be safe and secure. It was her college fund, her safety net, and our home mortgage protection all rolled into one. And the woman who gave birth to my husband had just stolen it from her own flesh and blood. I unlocked my car, sat in the driver's seat, and pulled out my phone. My hands were shaking furiously, but my mind was beginning to snap out of the fog of grief and into a sharp, calculating focus. I dialed Brenda's personal cell phone number. The line rang 3 times before it connected. Instead of the quiet background noise of her suburban home, I heard the loud, distinct sound of ocean waves crashing against a shore. In the background, a steel drum band was playing a lively tropical song. Then I heard the unmistakable sharp clink of crystal champagne glasses toasting. Brenda answered the phone with a loud, cheerful sigh. She said, "Hello, Natalie, darling. I suppose you went to the bank today." Her voice lacked any trace of the mourning mother I had comforted just 2 weeks prior. It was dripping with arrogance and deep satisfaction. I gripped the steering wheel and asked her exactly what she had done with David's money. Brenda laughed, a dry, harsh sound that made my blood boil. She told me very clearly that David was her son, and she brought him into this world. Therefore, his money was her rightful compensation for having to endure the pain of losing him. She actually had the nerve to tell me that I was just a temporary fixture in his life and an outsider to their true family bond. She said I raised a successful man, Natalie. You got to live in his nice house, but I deserve to reap the rewards of his hard work. Richard and I are finally going to live the lifestyle I was always meant to have. Richard was her boyfriend of 6 months. He was 55 years old, a smooth-talking man who always wore cheap cologne and expensive suits he clearly could not afford. David had never liked him and always suspected he was a grifter looking for a meal ticket. Before I could even respond to her insane logic, Richard's voice chimed in through the speakerphone. He was laughing loudly. He yelled out, "Thanks for the early retirement fund, Natalie. Do not worry, we will send Lily a postcard from the beach." The sheer audacity of his voice pushed me past the point of sorrow and straight into a cold, intense fury. I told Brenda that she was committing a massive crime and that she was stealing from a 7-year-old child. I warned her that I would involve the authorities and have her tracked down. Brenda simply sighed into the receiver, acting incredibly bored by my threats. She told me to grow up and face reality. She reminded me that her name was on the legal documents and she had every right to withdraw those funds. She said no police officer in the world would arrest a mother for taking money from a joint account she legally co-owned. She told me to enjoy working my boring computer job for the rest of my life, while she enjoyed the sunshine. Then the line went completely dead. I threw my phone onto the passenger seat. My breathing was heavy and ragged. I started the engine and forcefully pulled out into the street. I did not drive to the police station. I drove straight toward the upscale suburban neighborhood where Brenda lived. I needed to see it for myself. I needed to know if this was a sudden, impulsive decision or a calculated strike. 20 minutes later, I pulled into her long driveway. Her perfectly manicured lawn looked normal, but her luxury sedan was missing from the garage. I walked up to the heavy oak front door and knocked. There was no answer. I knew the code to the side garage door because David had installed the security system for her years ago. I punched in the numbers and the door clicked open. I walked into the kitchen and the silence of the house felt heavy and unnatural. The moment I stepped into the main living area, the reality of her betrayal became undeniably clear. The house was entirely stripped of anything truly valuable. The expensive oil paintings that used to hang above the fireplace were gone. The antique silver dining set she bragged about at every Thanksgiving was nowhere to be found. I walked up the sweeping staircase and into her master bedroom. The doors to her massive walk-in closet were wide open. Every single designer dress, every expensive handbag, and all of her high-end shoes had been completely cleared out. The small floor safe in the corner of her closet was hanging open and completely empty. This was not a panicked escape. This was a highly organized, incredibly well-executed extraction. She had spent the last 2 weeks playing the role of a grieving, shattered mother in front of our entire family while secretly packing up her life and plotting to drain my bank account. I walked slowly back downstairs, feeling the gravity of the situation settling heavily on my shoulders. As I passed the large marble island in the center of her kitchen, a small square of neon pink caught my eye. It was a sticky note pressed firmly onto the pristine stone surface. I walked over and looked down at it. The handwriting was sloppy and jagged, belonging unmistakably to Richard. The note read, simply, "Enjoy the empty house, Natalie. Thanks for funding our early retirement. Do not bother trying to find us." I stared at the piece of paper for a long time. They thought they had won. They thought that because they had manipulated a grieving widow and exploited a legal loophole, they were untouchable. They thought my job in cybersecurity just meant I fixed broken laptops and reset passwords. They had absolutely no idea who they were truly dealing with. I took a deep breath, folded the sticky note carefully, and slid it into my pocket. The crushing weight of my grief was suddenly replaced by a sharp, laser-focused determination. Brenda had used my love for David to disarm me. She had used my vulnerability as a weapon to destroy my daughter's future. I walked out of the empty house and locked the door behind me. I sat back in my car and stared at the dark windows of Brenda's house. She wanted to play a high-stakes game of financial theft and disappear into the sunset. But she had made one massive, fatal mistake. She left me with nothing left to lose and a deep, burning desire to take back every single thing she stole. I pulled out of the driveway, heading toward the one person in my husband's family who might actually help me. I pulled up to the sprawling modern farmhouse owned by my sister-in-law Samantha. The driveway was packed with cars belonging to various members of David's extended family. They were having a Sunday barbecue. The smell of grilled meat and the sound of laughter drifted through the warm afternoon air. It made me absolutely sick to my stomach. I slammed my car door shut and marched straight up the brick walkway. I did not bother knocking. I pushed the heavy oak front door open and walked right into the middle of their gathering in the massive open concept kitchen. Samantha was standing by the marble island, pouring herself a glass of chilled white wine. She looked up at me and let out a long, exasperated sigh. Before I could even open my mouth to speak, she rolled her eyes and took a slow sip of her drink. She said, "Let me guess, you went to the bank today. You always were a little too obsessed with checking your accounts, Natalie." The sheer casualness of her tone felt like a physical slap across the face. I stood there staring at her perfectly styled hair and expensive designer clothes. I demanded to know where her mother was and exactly how long she had known about this sickening plan. Samantha did not look guilty. She did not look ashamed. She simply set her wine glass down and crossed her arms over her chest defensively. She looked me up and down and said, "You need to calm down and stop making a scene in my house. Mom deserves that money. You make 6 figures working as a fancy cybersecurity consultant. You can easily afford to let Mom have this one thing. Do not be so incredibly greedy just because David is gone." I felt my jaw drop in absolute disbelief. I asked her if she was out of her mind. I reminded her that the money was an $850,000 life insurance payout meant to secure the future of her own 7-year-old niece Lily. I asked her how she could possibly justify her mother stealing a child future to run off to a tropical beach with a deadbeat boyfriend. Samantha scoffed and waved her hand dismissively. She told me that Lily was my responsibility now and that I was perfectly capable of providing for her on my own. She said Mom spent her entire life raising David and supporting his dreams. She paid her dues. Richard makes her happy, and they needed a fresh start. Besides, she did not leave us completely empty-handed. She was generous enough to leave me the keys to her Porsche Panamera as a thank you for understanding her situation. The sickening truth clicked into place. Brenda had bought her own daughter Silence with a used luxury car. Samantha had completely sold out her dead brother legacy and her niece's future so she could drive around town in a status symbol she did not earn. I told her she was an absolute disgrace to David's memory. I told her that accepting that car made her an accomplice to massive financial theft. Samantha's face turned bright red with sudden anger. She slammed her hand flat against the marble countertop, causing her wine glass to rattle. She pointed a manicured finger directly at my chest and told me to watch my mouth. She said that I was the one who never truly fit into their family. She claimed that David was always stressed out because of my demanding career and my constant need for independence. She twisted the narrative, completely blaming me for the fact that Brenda felt the need to take the money and leave. She said if I had just been a more traditional, supportive wife, maybe her mother would not have felt so alienated and desperate for an escape. I stood my ground and stared her down. I told Samantha that her logic was as cheap and flawed as her loyalty. I reminded her that while she was busy attending country club luncheons, I was the one pulling double shifts to help pay off David's early business loans. I told her that my cybersecurity career was the exact reason David and I were able to build a comfortable life in the first place. I told her she was a pathetic hypocrite who was perfectly fine watching a grieving widow get robbed as long as she got a shiny new toy out of the deal. Samantha crossed her arms and sneered at me. She said it did not matter what I thought because the money was gone and there was absolutely nothing I could do about it. She told me the bank allowed it because Brenda was a joint account holder, so it was perfectly legal. She smirked and told me I should just go home, cry it out, and figure out how to budget my salary better. She actually had the nerve to suggest I take out a second mortgage on my house to pay for Lily's education. I felt a cold rage building inside my chest. This was not just a betrayal by a greedy mother-in-law. This was a coordinated family effort to strip me of everything David had left behind. They had all sat around and decided that my grief was an opportunity for their financial gain. They looked at a grieving widow and a fatherless 7-year-old girl and saw nothing but a payday. I told Samantha that she was severely underestimating how far I was willing to go to protect my daughter. I promised her that by the time I was finished, nobody in this family would be laughing and nobody would be driving a stolen Porsche. Samantha just rolled her eyes again, picked up her wine glass, and took another slow sip. She told me I was being dramatic and threatening her would get me nowhere. She turned her back to me and yelled out to the backyard, telling the rest of the family that I was here causing trouble. The heavy sliding glass door leading to the patio scraped open, and the loud chatter from the barbecue instantly spilled into the kitchen. David, Aunt Patricia, and Uncle Robert walked in, followed closely by a few cousins I had always tolerated for David's sake. They all looked at me with varying degrees of annoyance and judgment. It was clear from their expressions that Samantha had already poisoned the well. They had already been briefed on the situation, and they had already chosen their side. Aunt Patricia crossed the room holding a plate of potato salad. She looked at me with a sickeningly sweet, patronizing smile. She said, "Oh, Natalie, dear, we were hoping you would not make a big fuss out of this. You know how Brenda has been struggling since the funeral. She just needed a little getaway to clear her head. You really should not be harassing Samantha like this." I turned to Patricia and asked her if she considered stealing $850,000 to be a little getaway. I asked her if she thought leaving a fatherless child with a zero-balance bank account was an acceptable way to mourn. Uncle Robert stepped forward, puffing his chest out to try and intimidate me. He told me I was being entirely too materialistic. He said David always said you were too focused on money and career. Brenda gave that boy life. She raised him to be the successful man you married. If she feels she is owed a portion of his estate to secure her retirement, then, as his wife, you should honor that. You should be happy she is finally finding peace after such a devastating loss. I could not believe what I was hearing. I looked around the room at these people who had eaten at my dinner table, who had smiled in my face, and who had pretended to mourn alongside me just a few days ago. They were all nodding in agreement with Robert. They had twisted reality so completely that the thief was the victim, and I, the actual victim, was the greedy villain trying to ruin their family peace. One of the cousins chimed in from the back of the room, saying that I should have been paying closer attention to my finances if I cared so much. She said it was my own fault for signing the paperwork and giving Brenda access in the first place. She told me to take some personal responsibility instead of coming into their home and yelling at everyone. The sheer level of gaslighting was suffocating. They were protecting Brenda because she was blood, and because she had likely promised them all a piece of the pie once the dust settled. They were actively participating in the financial abuse of a widow because they genuinely believed I did not belong to their inner circle. I was an outsider who just happened to share David's last name. I raised my voice so every single person in the room could hear me. I told them that the money was not a retirement fund for a woman who spent her life living beyond her means. It was a life insurance policy specifically purchased to pay off my mortgage and put Lily through college. I told them that what Brenda did was not a misunderstanding or a desperate act of grief. It was grand larceny. I warned them that anyone who helped her hide the money or accepted gifts purchased with stolen funds would be legally implicated. Patricia gasped and clutched her pearls, a classic theatrical move she loved to deploy. She accused me of threatening the family with baseless legal action. She said no police officer would ever arrest a grieving mother for accessing a joint account. She told me to leave the house immediately before she called the police to have me removed for trespassing. Robert stepped closer to me, aggressively invading my personal space. He pointed his finger in my face and told me that if I dared to drag their family name through the mud with a messy lawsuit, they would pool their resources and bury me in court. He said they would fight for custody of Lily, claiming I was an unfit, unstable mother who cared more about cash than family values. The room fell completely silent. The threat hung in the air, heavy and toxic. They were willing to take my child away just to protect their stolen money. I felt a sudden, sharp spike of adrenaline. I realized I was standing in a room full of enemies. I was completely alone against a unified front of delusional, greedy enablers. Before I could formulate a response to Robert's disgusting threat, a deep, commanding voice echoed from the hallway leading to the home office. The voice said, "You will not do absolutely anything of the sort, Robert. If you take one more step toward my sister-in-law, I will personally ensure you spend the next 5 years dealing with a restraining order." Everyone turned their heads in shock. Jamal walked into the kitchen. He was Samantha's husband, an incredibly sharp African-American man who worked as a high-powered financial lawyer in the city. Jamal had always been the quiet observer at family functions, usually keeping to himself and analyzing the room. He was a man of uncompromising ethics, and he had zero tolerance for nonsense. He walked straight past Robert, completely ignoring the older man blustering anger, and stood firmly between me and the rest of the family. He was holding a thick manila folder in his left hand. Samantha's face dropped. She quickly stepped forward and grabbed his arm, trying to pull him away from me. She whispered frantically, telling him to stay out of it, and that this was a private family matter that did not concern him. Jamal gently but firmly removed her hand from his arm. He looked down at his wife with an expression of pure, unadulterated disgust. He spoke loud enough for the entire kitchen to hear. He said, "This stopped being a private family matter the second your mother committed a federal crime, Samantha. And it became my business the second you decided to accept a stolen luxury car as hush money." Samantha stammered, trying to defend herself. She claimed the car was a gift and that the bank transfer was totally legal because Brenda's name was on the account. Jamal slammed the manila folder down onto the marble island. The sound cracked like a whip, silencing the entire room. He looked directly at Samantha and then scanned the faces of every family member present. He shredded their logic piece by piece. He explained that while being a joint account holder gave Brenda the ability to authorize a transfer, it did not give her legal ownership of the funds. The money was clearly designated as a life insurance payout meant for the surviving spouse and child. By moving the entire sum into a private offshore account to fund a vacation with her boyfriend, Brenda had committed what the federal government calls wire fraud and unlawful conversion of assets. Jamal turned to Uncle Robert and told him that his threat to take Lily away was not only legally laughable, but also borderline extortion. He advised Robert to keep his mouth shut unless he wanted a visit from Child Protective Services regarding the unsafe environment he was currently fostering. Aunt Patricia tried to interrupt, claiming Jamal was overreacting and taking my side simply because he never liked Brenda. Jamal cut her off instantly. He told Patricia that he was taking the side of the law. He looked at the family and told them they were all acting like a pack of starving vultures picking at the bones of a dead man. He told them he was deeply ashamed to be associated with people who would steal from a grieving 7-year-old girl. Samantha began to cry fake tears, trying to manipulate the situation. She begged Jamal to lower his voice and stop embarrassing her in front of everyone. She said she was just trying to protect her mother, who was hurting. Jamal did not soften. His voice remained cold and steady. He told Samantha that she was not protecting her mother, she was protecting her own selfish interests. He said she traded her niece's future for a set of keys. He told her that ignorance of the law is not an excuse, but willful participation makes her an accessory after the fact. Jamal turned to me and placed a reassuring hand on my shoulder. It was the first time since David died that I felt like someone actually had my back. He looked at me and said, "Natalie, you do not have to fight these people alone. I am stepping in. I am taking your case pro bono starting right this very second. We are going to get every single penny back, and we are going to make sure the people responsible face the absolute maximum penalties under the law." Samantha let out a loud, dramatic gasp. She stared at Jamal as if he had just transformed into a monster right in front of her eyes. She yelled at him, asking how he could possibly betray his own wife to help an outsider ruin her mother's life. She demanded that he drop the case immediately and apologize to her family. Jamal slowly picked up his manila folder from the counter. He looked at Samantha with a heavy, tired sadness in his eyes. He said, "I am not betraying my wife. I am discovering who she truly is. I took an oath to uphold the law, but more importantly, I took an oath to be a decent human being. If you think I'm going to sit back and watch you and your family financially ruin a widow and a child, you are completely out of your mind. Samantha's face contorted with rage. She told him that if he walked out that door with me, he was not welcome back in their house. She issued an ultimatum right there in the middle of her kitchen, surrounded by her enabling relatives. She told Jamal he had to choose between his marriage and my lawsuit. I felt a pang of guilt. I never wanted to destroy Jamal's marriage. I reached out and touched his arm, telling him he did not have to do this. I told him I appreciated his support, but I did not want him to lose his family over my nightmare. Jamal looked at me and shook his head firmly. He said, "Natalie, my family is supposed to be built on trust and integrity. This is not a family. This is a criminal syndicate, operating out of a suburban subdivision." He turned back to Samantha and gave her his final answer. He told her that she had exactly 24 hours to return the stolen Porsche to the dealership and transfer any leftover hush money into an escrow account. He warned her that if she refused, he would personally report her to the authorities as an accomplice to federal fraud. Samantha screamed at him, telling him to get out and never come back. Aunt Patricia and Uncle Robert started shouting insults at Jamal, calling him a traitor and a terrible husband. The entire house erupted into chaos. Jamal did not engage with them anymore. He turned his back on the screaming crowd, put his hand gently on my upper back, and guided me toward the front door. We walked out of the house, leaving the toxic shouting behind us. The bright afternoon sun felt intensely hot as we walked down the driveway to our cars. Jamal pulled out his phone and immediately started typing. He told me to follow him to his downtown office. He said we had zero time to waste because international wire transfers move quickly and we needed to start filing emergency injunctions before the banks closed for the weekend. I got into my car and gripped the steering wheel. My hands were no longer shaking. The paralyzing grief had been entirely replaced by a cold, calculated drive for justice. I started the engine and followed Jamal's sleek black sedan out of the neighborhood. As I drove, I thought about Samantha and the rest of the family. They thought they had backed me into a corner. They thought they had completely isolated me by forming a united front of denial and blame. But all they had really done was awaken a sleeping giant. By pushing Jamal away, they had handed me the exact weapon I needed to tear their entire plan to pieces. We arrived at Jamal's high-rise office building in downtown Seattle. The weekend security guard buzzed us in, and we rode the elevator up to the 40th floor in complete silence. The gravity of what we were about to do hung heavy in the air. Jamal unlocked his glass doors, and we walked into his massive corner office. He immediately took off his suit jacket, rolled up his sleeves, and booted up his computer. He told me to sit down and prepare myself because the legal battle ahead was going to be incredibly messy and extremely fast-paced. He said the first thing we needed to do was track exactly where the money went and figure out how to freeze it before Richard could convert it into untraceable assets. I sat in the leather chair opposite Jamal's massive oak desk. He started making rapid-fire phone calls to his contacts within the banking industry. I watched as he expertly navigated the automated systems and bypassed lower-level customer service representatives demanding to speak with the fraud investigation executives. Despite his aggressive tactics, the news we were getting back was incredibly bleak. Jamal hung up the phone after a heated 20-minute conversation with the Chase Bank Regional Legal Director. He rubbed his temples and let out a frustrated sigh. He looked across the desk at me and delivered the harsh reality of our situation. Because Brenda was legally registered as a joint signer on the account, the bank considered the initial transfer to be fully authorized. The police department had already declined to open a criminal investigation, categorizing it as a civil domestic dispute. Jamal explained that the system was fundamentally flawed when it came to joint accounts. The bank did not care about the moral intent behind the money, or the fact that it was a life insurance payout meant for a minor. They only cared that Brenda's signature was verified. As far as the local authorities were concerned, Brenda took her own money and went on vacation. I felt a cold knot of panic tighten in my stomach. I asked him if that meant they were going to get away with it. I asked if there was absolutely nothing we could do to stop them from spending Lily Future. Jamal shook his head and pulled up a digital map on his monitor. He said he managed to get the routing information from a contact inside the wire department. Brenda and Richard did not just move the money to another domestic bank. They executed a sophisticated multi-step transfer. The $850,000 was currently sitting in a temporary holding account at an offshore bank in the Cayman Islands. Jamal pointed at the screen and explained the nightmare scenario. He said this was Richard doing. Richard had clearly orchestrated this because he knew exactly how to exploit the banking system. The money was in a pending status for compliance checks due to the large amount. We had exactly 72 hours before the Cayman Bank cleared the funds and released them into an untraceable private crypto wallet that Richard had set up. Once the money hit the blockchain, it would vanish into the digital ether forever. We would never be able to recover a single dime. The clock was ticking down. 72 hours to unravel a flawless legal theft. I leaned forward, resting my elbows on my knees and putting my face in my hands. The legal wall was massive. We could not get the police to act. We could not get the domestic bank to reverse the wire. And we had zero jurisdiction over the offshore account holding the cash. Jamal leaned back in his chair, staring at the ceiling. He said we needed a silver bullet. We needed hard, undeniable proof that Brenda was coerced, or that the transfer was part of a larger criminal enterprise that violated federal laws. If we could prove intent to commit international fraud or money laundering, we could bypass the local police and go straight to the federal government to freeze the assets. But we had nothing. All we had was a mocking sticky note left on a kitchen counter and a phone call filled with arrogant insults. None of that was enough to secure a federal injunction. We needed digital footprints. We needed communications between Brenda and Richard proving their malicious intent before the transfer took place. I sat up straight as my cybersecurity instincts suddenly kicked into overdrive. I told Jamal that if Richard planned this, he definitely left a digital trail. Grifters always think they are smarter than everyone else, but they are inherently lazy when it comes to operational security. I told Jamal I needed to get back to my house immediately. I needed to access my secure home network and see if any of their devices had pinged my router during the 2 weeks Brenda was visiting me. Jamal nodded and told me to go. He said he would stay at the office and start drafting the federal injunction paperwork so it would be ready to file the absolute second we found a shred of actionable evidence. We agreed to keep our communications strictly encrypted. I rushed out of his office and took the elevator down to the parking garage. The situation was desperate, but I was no longer a helpless, grieving widow. I was a highly trained digital security expert, and I was going to hunt them down through the network. I drove back to my house with my heart pounding against my ribs. I had no idea that the silver bullet Jamal and I were desperately searching for was already waiting for me at home, sitting right in the hands of my 7-year-old daughter. As I turned the corner onto my street, my heart sank. A silver SUV was parked across my walkway. Aunt Patricia and Uncle Thomas were standing on my front porch with their arms tightly crossed. They had apparently left the barbecue right after Jamal and I drove away and rushed to my house. They wanted to ambush me before I could catch my breath or figure out my next move. I turned off the car engine and took a deep breath to steady my shaking hands. I stepped out and walked slowly up my driveway. Before I could reach the first step, Patricia started screaming at me. She pointed her finger right at my face and told me that Jamal might be fooled by my victim act, but they certainly were not. She said they came over for a serious family intervention because I was about to destroy everyone over a simple misunderstanding. I glared at her, asking how stealing nearly $1 million from a fatherless child could ever be a simple misunderstanding. Thomas stepped forward, physically blocking my path to my own front door. He puffed out his chest aggressively and told me to lower my voice in my own neighborhood. He said I was acting completely unhinged and that this exact dramatic behavior was the reason Brenda had to leave. Thomas looked me right in the eyes and said, "You drove her to this, Natalie. You have always been a cold tech-obsessed workaholic. You spent your entire marriage staring at computer screens instead of taking care of your husband and your mother-in-law. You never made Brenda feel welcome or loved in this house." Patricia chimed in, nodding her head vigorously in agreement. She said David was a warm, loving man, and I was nothing but a calculated, emotionless machine. She told me that I never bothered to cook family dinners or host the holidays properly. She said I was always too busy climbing the corporate ladder in cybersecurity to be a real mother. She claimed that Brenda took that money because she felt she needed to secure her own future. Patricia said Brenda knew I was eventually going to cut her out of our lives, so she simply took what she rightfully deserved before I could lock her out. The sheer audacity of their victim blaming left me speechless. They were standing on the porch of the home I paid for, criticizing the career that funded David, early business ventures. They were using my fresh grief as a weapon. They had twisted the narrative so severely that they genuinely believed Brenda was a helpless victim of my success. I looked directly at Patricia and told her she was completely delusional. I reminded her that my career was the only reason David had the financial capital to start his company without going into massive debt. I told her that while she was busy judging my parenting skills, I was the one paying for Brenda expensive medical bills last year. Thomas shook his head and waved his hand in the air dismissively. He said none of that past history mattered right now. He told me that family is about forgiveness, grace, and understanding. He demanded that I call Jamal right now and tell him to drop the federal injunctions immediately. He said if I dragged Brenda through federal court, it would ruin the family name and cause damage to everyone's peace of mind. He stepped closer to me and said, "You need to let this go, Natalie. You have to protect the family peace. It is just money, and you can always make more, but you can never replace your family. David would have wanted you to take the high road and keep the peace for the sake of everyone involved." I felt a cold, sharp laugh escape my throat. I told Thomas that David would be disgusted by every single one of them standing here defending a criminal. Asking a grieving widow to sacrifice her daughter's college fund to protect a thief was sickening. I stated clearly that there was no family peace left to protect because they had declared absolute war on me. I pulled my cell phone out of my pocket and held it up. I told them they had exactly 10 seconds to get off my property before I dialed the police and had them arrested for trespassing. I told them if they ever showed up at my house again, I would file permanent restraining orders against both of them. Patricia gasped loudly and dramatically clutched her chest. She told Thomas to get in the car because I was too bitter to reason with. Thomas glared at me with pure hatred and told me I was going to end up completely alone. I watched Patricia and Thomas speed away in their silver SUV until they disappeared around the corner. My hands were shaking from the adrenaline, but my mind was incredibly clear. I turned around, unlocked my front door, and stepped into the quiet sanctuary of my home. The silence was a stark contrast to the shouting match that had just occurred on my porch. I walked straight into the kitchen and poured myself a glass of cold water. I needed to get to my home office and start running network diagnostics to see if Brenda had left a digital footprint on my router. Just as I set my glass down on the counter, a heavy knock echoed from the front door. I checked the security camera feed on my phone. It was Jamal. He was standing on my porch holding a thick stack of manila folders in one hand and a large leather duffel bag slung over his shoulder. I opened the door immediately. Jamal stepped inside and his face was tight with an anger I had never seen from him before. He did not say a word as he walked past me into the dining room. He dropped his heavy duffel bag onto the hardwood floor with a loud thud and slammed the massive stack of legal documents onto the center of my dining table. The papers spilled out slightly, revealing highlighted banking statutes and federal criminal codes. Jamal looked at me and pointed at the papers. He said I just left the courthouse after pulling every precedent I could find on offshore wire transfers involving joint accounts. The local police might think this is a civil issue, but they are completely wrong. This is not a family dispute, Natalie. This is federal wire fraud, plain and simple. That money was specifically designated in a trust for Lily, and Brenda committed unlawful conversion of assets the second she moved it to the Cayman Islands. He unbuttoned his suit jacket and paced across my dining room floor. His disgust was palpable. He told me he had spent the last hour reviewing the exact wording of David's life insurance policy. He explained that because the funds were strictly earmarked for the welfare of a minor, Brenda had a fiduciary duty as a joint signer to act in Lily's best interest. By draining the account to fund a luxury vacation with Richard, she violated federal trust laws. Jamal ran his hands over his face and let out a harsh laugh. He said, "I look at these documents and I feel physically sick. I am looking at the legal definition of grand larceny orchestrated by the woman who is supposed to be my mother-in-law." He stopped pacing and looked directly at me. He said, "I am so incredibly disgusted by my wife family. I have spent years defending corporate clients against hostile takeovers, but I have never seen a level of predatory greed like this inside someone's own home. They did not just steal from you, Natalie. They targeted a grieving widow and a 7-year-old child. It is purely evil." I pulled out a chair and sat down at the table looking at the highlighted legal codes. I told him about the ambush on my porch. I told him how Patricia and Thomas had just stood there blaming my career and my personality for Brenda's decision to steal the money. I told him they demanded I drop everything to protect the family peace. Jamal's jaw clenched tightly as I recounted the conversation. He slammed his fist onto the table, making the folders jump. He said, "There is no family peace to protect. They are a syndicate of enablers who think they can bully you into submission because you are alone. But you are not alone. I am going to tear their entire defense apart piece by piece. I am going to build a federal case so airtight that the Department of Justice will have no choice but to issue international arrest warrants." Jamal pulled a pen from his pocket and started aggressively circling paragraphs on the top document. He said, "We need to prove intent. We need to show the federal authorities that Brenda and Richard planned this extraction meticulously. If we can hand the FBI a silver bullet, proving premeditated fraud, the joint account loophole completely collapses." I looked at the leather duffel bag sitting on the floor by the entryway. The reality of what Jamal was risking suddenly hit me. I pointed at the bag and asked him what happened after I left his office to come back here. Jamal followed my gaze to the bag and his expression hardened into a mask of cold resolve. He pulled out a chair and sat down across from me. He told me that after he finished drafting the preliminary federal injunctions at his office, he went back to his house to pack some clothes. He expected the barbecue to be over and the house to be empty. Instead, he walked right into a war zone. Samantha was waiting for him in their master bedroom. She had apparently spent the last 2 hours riling herself up and convincing herself that she was the victim. Jamal said the second he walked through the bedroom door, Samantha ordered him to drop his bag and stay out of the situation completely. She told him that my money problems were none of his business and that he was actively destroying their marriage by choosing my side over her mother. She screamed that he was tearing their family apart over a minor technicality. Jamal told me he did not raise his voice. He simply walked over to his closet and calmly pulled down his travel bag. He told Samantha that she fundamentally misunderstood the situation. He publicly declared right then and there that he was formally representing me pro bono, and that he would not stop until every single dollar was returned to Lily's account. He told his wife that her mother was a thief and that the entire family was complicit in hiding a fugitive. Samantha completely lost her mind. She threw a hairbrush across the room and demanded that he respect her family. She actually tried to defend keeping the Porsche, claiming it was a legitimate gift and that she had every right to drive it. Jamal said he zipped up his duffel bag and looked his wife dead in the eyes. He delivered the harsh, undeniable legal reality. He warned Samantha that by keeping that luxury car, knowing full well it was purchased with stolen trust funds, she was officially an accessory to grand larceny. He explained to her that the federal government does not care about family loyalty or hurt feelings. They care about the paper trail and the flow of illicit money. He told Samantha that if she started driving that car, she was participating in money laundering. He warned her that if the FBI launched an investigation, she could face federal indictment and potentially lose custody of their own children. He told her she was playing a highly dangerous game for the sake of a used sports car. Samantha tried to call his bluff. She crossed her arms and told him he would never actually turn his own wife into the authorities. She told him to stop acting like a dramatic lawyer and start acting like a supportive husband. Jamal said that was the exact moment the marriage fractured beyond repair. He realized he was looking at a stranger. He told me he saw the exact same toxic greed in Samantha's eyes that Brenda had shown when she emptied my bank account. The entitlement was deeply rooted in their bloodline. Jamal picked up his bag and walked toward the bedroom door. He told Samantha that he took an oath to uphold the law, and he took a vow to be a decent man. He said if being a supportive husband meant turning a blind eye to the financial abuse of a fatherless child, then he wanted absolutely nothing to do with their marriage. He walked out of the house, leaving Samantha screaming his name from the top of the stairs. He threw his bag into his car and drove straight here. Jamal leaned back in my dining room chair and let out a long, exhausted breath. He said, "My marriage is over, Natalie. I cannot sleep in the same bed as a woman who would sell out her own niece for a status symbol. I am staying at a hotel downtown tonight, but right now we have work to do. We have a 72-hour window before that money vanishes into the Cayman Islands blockchain. We need to find that digital footprint. We need to find the evidence that proves Richard and Brenda planned this before David even passed away." I looked at Jamal and felt a profound sense of gratitude. He had just sacrificed his entire life to help me fight this battle. I stood up from the table and told him I was going to my home office to tear my network logs apart. We were going to find the proof we needed. I walked down the short hallway to my home office, leaving Jamal in the dining room, where he had already transformed my large oak table into a secure extension of his downtown law firm. He booted up his encrypted laptop and immediately connected to his firm, private legal database. I sat at my own desk, surrounded by my multiple monitors, and pulled up the administrative logs for my home network. We were fighting a war on two fronts. Jamal was attacking the legal bureaucracy, and I was hunting for the digital footprints. Through the open door, I could hear Jamal dialing the direct line to the Seattle Police Department Financial Crimes Division. He put the call on speakerphone so I could listen while I worked. A lieutenant named Harris answered the phone, sounding completely exhausted and entirely unhelpful. Jamal bypassed the pleasantries and laid out the exact details of the unlawful conversion of the trust funds. He explained that Brenda had drained the account and fled the jurisdiction with a man who had a history of financial grifting. Lieutenant Harris let out a long, heavy sigh over the speaker. He told Jamal the exact same thing the bank manager had told me earlier that morning. He said, "Counselor, I understand your frustration, and I feel terrible for the widow, but my hands are completely tied by the letter of the law. Brenda was legally added as a joint signer on that account. She did not forge a signature, and she did not use a stolen password. She walked into a branch, showed her government identification, and authorized a transfer. As far as the state of Washington is concerned, she simply withdrew her own money. This is a civil domestic dispute, not a criminal matter. You need to file a civil lawsuit in family court." Jamal's voice remained dangerously calm, but the anger was simmering just beneath the surface. He told the lieutenant that a civil lawsuit would be completely useless because the money was no longer in the United States. Jamal explained that his banking contacts confirmed the $850,000 was currently sitting in a temporary offshore holding account in the Cayman Islands. He stressed that Richard had intentionally chosen a banking haven that refuses to comply with United States civil subpoenas. Jamal warned the lieutenant that they had exactly 72 hours before the Cayman bank cleared the pending transaction. Once that hold was released, Richard was going to funnel the money through a decentralized cryptocurrency exchange. Jamal said once it hits the blockchain, it will be completely untraceable. A 7-year-old girl will lose her entire future because your department refuses to recognize a meticulously planned international fraud operation. Harris' tone grew cold and defensive. He said, "We do not freeze international assets based on a hunch, Mr. Davis. Unless you can provide me with hard physical evidence that Brenda was coerced, threatened, or actively participating in a larger federal money laundering scheme, I cannot take this to a judge. I cannot issue a criminal warrant for a mother taking money out of her own shared account. Give me a confession, give me a recorded threat, or give me a digital paper trail of extortion. Without that, you have hit a brick wall. Have a good evening, counselor." The line went dead. Jamal stared at his phone in absolute silence. He looked over at me sitting in the doorway of my office. The legal wall was massive and entirely unforgiving. The justice system was perfectly designed to protect thieves who knew how to exploit the fine print. Jamal ran his hands over his face and told me that unless I found a smoking gun in my network logs, we were going to lose the money forever. I turned back to my monitors and typed furiously. My fingers flew across the keyboard as I ran deep packet inspections and queried every single device that had connected to my Wi-Fi router over the past 2 weeks. I was looking for anything. An email to the Cayman Bank, a message to Richard, a search history about offshore accounts. But the screen kept returning empty results. Brenda had not connected her personal cell phone to my home network at all. She had entirely relied on her own cellular data plan, ensuring that none of her internet traffic passed through my router. Richard had never even stepped foot inside my house. There was absolutely zero digital footprint. They had executed a perfectly clean extraction. The reality of the situation crushed me. I stared at the glowing empty logs on my screen as the clock ticked away in the background. We had less than 70 hours left. I had the best financial lawyer in the city sitting in my dining room, and I possessed top-tier cybersecurity skills, but we were completely paralyzed. We were out of legal options and out of digital leads. I put my face in my hands, feeling the bitter sting of total defeat. The room was heavy with silence until I heard the soft sound of small footsteps walking into my office. I lifted my head and wiped the tears from my cheeks. Lily was standing in the doorway of my home office holding her tablet. She was wearing her favorite pajamas and her hair was messy from sleep. I had lost track of time and realized it was past her bedtime. I forced a smile, trying to hide the absolute despair crushing my chest. I did not want my 7-year-old daughter to see me broken. I took a deep breath and softly asked why she was awake. Lily walked closer to my desk, and her bright eyes studied my face with a focus that reminded me of David. She reached out and patted my arm gently. She said, "Mommy, why are you crying? Is it because of Grandma Brenda?" I glanced at the doorway and saw Jamal standing there. He had walked over from the dining room and was leaning against the doorframe watching with a sad expression. I looked back at my daughter, trying to find the right words to explain the nightmare without terrifying her. I told Lily that Grandma Brenda and her friend Richard had done something very bad. I explained in simple terms that they had taken an important box of money Daddy left for us. I told her they took it far away, and that Jamal and I were trying hard to get it back, but having a difficult time. I fully expected Lily to burst into tears or ask panicked questions about whether we were going to be okay. I braced myself to comfort her and promise everything would work out even though I had zero confidence it would. But Lily did not cry. She did not even look worried. Instead, she stood up perfectly straight, clutched her tablet to her chest, and looked at me with an incredibly calm expression. She tilted her head and said, "Mommy, do not cry. You do not need to worry about them because I handled Grandma and Richard." The room fell into an absolute silence. I stared at my tiny 7-year-old daughter, trying to process the words coming out of her mouth. Jamal pushed himself off the doorframe and stepped fully into the office, his brow furrowed in deep confusion. I let out a nervous laugh and asked Lily what she meant. I gently explained that this was not a game and that Grandma had done something very serious involving the bank and the police. Lily nodded her head, firmly, entirely unfazed by my warning. She said, "I know it is not a game, Mommy. I know Grandma is a bad guy now." She stepped closer to my computer monitors and pointed at the blank network logs I had been desperately staring at for the past hour. She told me I was looking in the wrong place. She said Grandma did not use the internet to steal the secrets. She used a pen and a piece of paper. I felt a cold chill run down my spine. I asked Lily to sit down on my lap and explain exactly what she was talking about. Jamal walked over and pulled up a chair, sitting directly beside us. His lawyer instincts were instantly activated, and he leaned in, listening intently to every single word my daughter was saying. Lily climbed onto my lap and set her tablet down on the desk. She looked at Jamal and then looked up at me. She said, "It happened 3 days ago when you were taking a nap in the afternoon. I was playing in the hallway and I saw Grandma sneak into your office. She thought I was asleep, but I was playing quietly. I saw her walk into your office, and she closed the door almost all the way, but left a tiny crack open. I crept up to the door and peeked inside. The lights were off, but Grandma had a small flashlight. She went straight to your big wooden desk. She opened the bottom drawer, the one where you keep the locked metal box with the important papers. My stomach completely dropped. I kept a fireproof lockbox in my bottom drawer. It contained the physical copies of the trust documents, our passports, and a small notebook where I kept the master recovery passwords for my offline secure drives. I always believed that keeping the most critical passwords off the digital network was the safest method of cybersecurity. I never imagined the physical threat would come from a trusted family member staying in my own guest bedroom. I asked Lily what happened next, trying to keep my voice perfectly steady. Lily looked down at her tablet and tapped the screen. I waited until she closed the drawer and sneaked back to the guest room. I knew she was doing something bad because she was hiding and using a flashlight in the middle of the day. You always told me physical security is just as important as digital security, Mommy. You taught me that if someone tries to steal our secrets, we track them and lock them out. So I decided to play a spy game. I wanted to catch the bad guy. Jamal leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. He asked her gently what she did next. Lily smiled, a bright, proud smile contrasting with the heavy tension in the room. She said I went into my toy box and grabbed my favorite brown teddy bear, the one that has the little zipper pocket on the back where I hide my allowance coins. I unzipped the pocket and took out the shiny silver tracking coin that you put in there when we went to the crowded amusement park last year. I stared at her in absolute disbelief. I had recently purchased a set of Apple AirTags a year ago. I placed one on my keychain, one in my car, and sewn one into the lining of her teddy bear so I could track her location in a large crowd. I asked Lily what she did with the tracking coin. She giggled softly and said I sneaked downstairs while Grandma was taking a shower. Her orange leather bag was sitting on the kitchen island. I unzipped the very bottom section of the bag where she keeps her makeup bags and pushed the tracking coin deep inside the lining. I knew she would never find it because she always complains about how messy the bottom of her purse is. Now we can track the bad guy anywhere she goes, just like you track me when we go to the mall. Jamal let out a loud, sharp laugh that echoed through the quiet house. It was a laugh of pure shock and incredible relief. He rubbed his hands over his face and shook his head, muttering under his breath about how a 7-year-old girl had just completely outsmarted a federal fraud operation. I pulled up the tracking application on my computer monitor and immediately saw a small green dot pulsing brightly on the global map. The signal was strong and undeniable. The tracker was currently stationary inside a massive luxury hotel complex situated directly in the heart of Dubai. They had flown halfway across the world to hide. I hugged Lily tightly, feeling a wave of hope wash over me. She had given us their physical location, which was an incredible victory, but it still did not solve our problem. I looked over at Jamal and explained that knowing where they were sleeping did not give us the digital proof we needed to freeze the offshore accounts. The Cayman Bank did not care where Brenda was located. They only cared about the authorization paperwork. We still needed a digital paper trail proving Richard had manipulated the transfer before it happened. Lily pulled back and patted my cheek. She said, I am not finished playing the spy game, Mommy. I did something else too. She picked up her tablet and handed it to me. The screen was displaying the family sharing settings menu. I looked at it confused. I asked her what she was trying to show. Lily said Grandma did not just steal your passwords from the desk. Before she left for the airport, she went into the hall closet and took the old silver iPad that you keep on the top shelf. She told Samantha she was taking it because the screen on her phone was too small to watch movies on the airplane. But she did not know that the old iPad was your special work tablet. My heart started pounding against my ribs like a jackhammer. The silver iPad she was talking about was not a regular tablet. It was a secondary device I used specifically for testing cybersecurity protocols and monitoring network vulnerabilities. It was rooted and connected to my developer account. I had completely forgotten it was even in that closet because I had not used it in months. Lily smiled. She said I remembered you told me that the special iPad can talk to your main computer if the sharing button is turned on. When Grandma went to the bathroom before leaving, I grabbed the iPad out of her travel bag. I went into the settings and turned on the cloud sync. Then I put it right back in her bag. Everything she types on that screen comes right back here to us. I stared at Lily in complete shock. Jamal let out a sharp breath and stood up from his chair. He walked over to the desk and looked down at the tablet in my daughter's hands. He asked her to repeat what she said because he wanted to be absolutely sure he was hearing her correctly. Lily smiled and repeated that the old silver iPad was sending every single thing Grandma typed directly back to my main computer because she had turned on the family sharing sync. Jamal looked at me with his eyes wide open. He said, Natalie, if she took a rooted device that is securely tethered to your administrative network, we do not just have her physical location. We have every single keystroke she makes. We have her search history, her emails, and her private messages. I did not waste a second. I gently lifted Lily off my lap and asked her to go to the kitchen to get herself a juice box because Mommy and Uncle Jamal needed to do some very important work on the computer. She skipped out of the office looking incredibly proud of her spy game. As soon as she was out of earshot, I turned back to my massive dual monitors. I pulled up my developer dashboard and initiated a secure handshake with the silver iPad. Because the device was originally registered under my enterprise security profile, I bypassed the standard consumer encryption and went straight into the core logs. The screen went black for a brief moment before a massive wall of text began populating on the right monitor. It was a live feed of the device activity. Jamal pulled his chair closer until his shoulder was touching mine. He leaned in and squinted at the lines of data scrolling past. He told me to filter the results and isolate any messaging applications or email clients Brenda had accessed since she boarded her flight to Dubai. I quickly ran a script to separate the network traffic. Within seconds, a neatly organized folder appeared on my desktop containing synchronized copies of her WhatsApp conversations and her personal email inbox. She had connected the iPad to the hotel wireless network just 2 hours ago. I opened the most recent WhatsApp chat log. It was a conversation between Brenda and a contact saved simply as Richard. Jamal pointed at the screen, his voice thick with anticipation. He said, "Read it from the beginning. Read what they were saying to each other before the transfer cleared." I scrolled up to the messages dated over a week ago, back when Brenda was sitting on my living room couch crying over David. The messages were sickening. Richard had sent her a detailed step-by-step instruction manual on how to manipulate my grief. He told her exactly what to say to convince me to add her name to the life insurance trust. He wrote out the script for her crocodile tears. But as I scrolled further down, the true extent of the criminal enterprise revealed itself. Richard was not just a greedy boyfriend looking for a luxury vacation. He was in deep financial trouble. He had sent Brenda a scanned copy of a legal threat from a private lending firm. He owed over $400,000 to some very dangerous people. He told Brenda that if she did not execute the wire transfer by Friday morning, he was going to leave her and go on the run alone. He had coerced her. He had systematically manipulated an older woman into committing a massive federal crime to pay off his own illicit debts. I kept scrolling and my eyes locked onto a message sent just 12 hours ago. It was a forward from a secure banking portal. Richard had sent Brenda the exact routing numbers for the offshore holding account in the Cayman Islands. Jamal slammed his hand down on the desk in triumph. He pointed aggressively at the routing numbers and the timestamp on the messages. He said, "This is it, Natalie. This is the silver bullet we needed. This proves premeditated international wire fraud and extortion. It proves Richard orchestrated the entire theft across state and international lines. This completely shatters the civil dispute defense the police were trying to use." I quickly exported the entire chat history and the email logs into a secure encrypted file. I handed Jamal a flash drive and he immediately plugged it into his laptop. He told me he was sending the package directly to his contacts at the Federal Bureau of Investigation. We finally had the physical location from the tracking coin, and we had the digital confession from the sync tablet. The trap was perfectly set, and we were ready to completely destroy their stolen vacation plans. Jamal pulled his phone out of his pocket, ready to dial his contact at the Federal Bureau of Investigation, but I immediately grabbed his wrist to stop him. I shook my head and told him to wait just a little bit longer. The text messages and the email logs were absolutely incredible pieces of evidence, but I knew that this specific silver iPad was capable of giving us something significantly more powerful. I looked at Jamal and explained the true nature of the device Brenda had mindlessly stolen from my hall closet. She thought she had just grabbed an old tablet to watch movies on her long flight to Dubai. She had absolutely no idea that she was carrying a highly sophisticated weapon of digital espionage right into her luxury hotel suite. I explained to Jamal that this was not a standard consumer electronic device you buy at a retail store. It was a custom flashed penetration testing device. I used it to simulate hostile network breaches and test the security infrastructure of my corporate clients. It was heavily modified and rooted at the firmware level. When Lily brilliantly turned on the family sharing cloud sync, she did not just link the photo albums and the text messages. She inadvertently established a secure remote access tunnel directly through the Dubai hotel firewall, straight back to my secure home server. I turned my attention entirely to my main terminal window. I bypassed the basic cloud interface and opened a command prompt. My fingers flew across the keyboard as I entered my administrator credentials and executed a root-level command shell. Jamal stood frozen behind my chair, watching in absolute awe as lines of green code rapidly cascaded down the dark screen of my secondary monitor. I told him I was no longer just reading their stored data. I was actively taking complete ghost control of the hardware itself. Because the device was rooted, I could access its physical sensors without triggering any notifications on the screen. I typed a final line of code and hit the Enter key to activate the background microphone array. A soft, static hiss filled my home office, followed instantly by the crisp, clear audio of a luxurious hotel suite. We could hear the distinct clinking of fine room service silverware and the muffled sound of a television playing in the background. Then we heard Richard's voice clear as day complaining about the humidity outside. We listened silently as Richard told Brenda to go down to the hotel spa and treat herself to a massage while he stayed upstairs to handle some boring financial paperwork. Brenda giggled loudly and told him to make sure their offshore account was set up correctly so they could go yacht shopping the next morning. The loud click of the heavy hotel suite door closing echoed through the speakers, confirming that Brenda had left the room. The absolute second Richard was alone, his entire demeanor shifted completely. We heard him pacing across the floor, muttering harsh curses under his breath. I quickly typed another command and activated the live screen mirroring function. My monitor flickered and suddenly displayed an exact real-time replica of the iPad screen. Richard was holding the device in his hands and opening a secure encrypted browser tab. Jamal leaned in so close his face was practically touching the glass of the monitor. We watched in real time as Richard navigated directly to the Cayman Islands offshore banking portal. He was checking the status of the pending wire transfer. But the screen mirroring revealed his ultimate betrayal. He was not looking at a joint retirement account for him and Brenda. He was actively logging into a decentralized cryptocurrency exchange. He was methodically typing in the routing numbers to funnel the entire $850,000 into a single signer digital wallet, the absolute second the bank hold cleared. He was setting up a completely untraceable exit strategy that excluded Brenda entirely. Jamal let out a low whistle of pure disbelief. He pointed at the screen and said, "Richard is going to take every single penny and leave your mother-in-law stranded in Dubai with nothing but a hotel bill. He is double-crossing the woman who committed a federal crime for him." I quickly initiated a silent screen capture program recording every single keystroke Richard made, including his newly created cryptocurrency wallet addresses and his private login credentials. We now possessed the ultimate payload. We had irrefutable video and audio evidence of a sophisticated international money laundering operation happening in real time. This was no longer just a case of unlawful conversion of a trust fund. It was an active federal cybercrime. I looked at Jamal and told him that we did not just have enough evidence to freeze the accounts anymore. We had enough evidence to put both of them in federal prison for a very long time. I turned away from the live screen mirroring of Richard and focused my attention back to the massive archive of data compiling on my left monitor. The synchronization Lily had initiated was not just pulling live activity. Because my security tablet was designed to scrape a device to its absolute core, it was currently downloading every single piece of cached data Brenda had generated. Jamal pulled his chair closer. He told me to stop looking at Richard and start digging into the mind of my mother-in-law. He wanted to see exactly how long she had been planning this betrayal. I opened the primary log file containing her web browsing history. I applied a filter to sort the queries by date starting from the day after my husband David passed away. The results populated instantly, and the sheer cruelty of her searches made my blood run completely cold. While I was busy arranging funeral services, Brenda was sitting in my guest room typing horrifying questions into the search bar. She had searched for things like, how long does life insurance take to pay out, and can a mother claim a son life insurance if he is married? She even searched for ways to contest a legally binding will. Jamal read the screen over my shoulder and let out a heavy sigh of absolute disgust. He pointed at a search query made just 3 days after the funeral. It read how to manipulate a grieving widow into signing financial documents. Jamal shook his head and said she did not even come to your house to mourn David. She came to your house to run a highly calculated confidence scam. She was researching psychological manipulation tactics while eating the meals you cooked for her. I felt a wave of nausea wash over me. The betrayal was so incredibly deep and premeditated that it felt entirely surreal. I closed the web browser history and opened her synchronized email client. I bypassed her primary inbox and went straight into her deleted items folder. Grifters like Brenda always think that hitting the delete button magically erases their tracks forever. They never understand that nothing is ever truly gone when a cybersecurity expert is sitting at the terminal. I recovered a chain of emails she had exchanged with a high-end luxury real estate agent based in Dubai. The emails were dated a week before she even approached me on the couch crying about the joint account. She had already picked out a massive beachfront villa. She had negotiated the monthly rental price and assured the agent that she would be wiring a substantial deposit within the next 10 days. She referred to the stolen money as her upcoming inheritance. She told the real estate agent that her son had tragically passed away but left her incredibly well provided for. I opened another folder containing her synchronized text messages and ran a keyword search for Samantha. I needed to know exactly how deeply my sister-in-law was involved in this conspiracy. The results made Jamal instantly tense up beside me. We read a long conversation between a mother and her daughter, plotting the financial ruin of my family. Brenda had texted Samantha telling her she was going to drain the account and run away. Samantha did not try to stop her. Instead, Samantha negotiated a bribe. She texted her mother back saying she would keep the secret only if Brenda signed over the title to the Porsche Panamera and left cash in an envelope. Jamal stared at the messages detailing his wife's extortion demands. His face turned completely rigid. He said Samantha did not just accept a gift. She actively extorted a federal fugitive. She capitalized on the theft of her own niece's future. Jamal pulled his phone out and took several clear photographs of the computer screen displaying the text messages. He said these messages are going straight to the divorce judge. I am going to make sure she never sees a single dime of alimony, and I am taking full custody of our children. She is completely unfit to be a mother. I compiled all the recovered search histories, the emails, and the text messages into a massive encrypted dossier. We were no longer just reading the mind of the enemy. We had completely dismantled their entire operation from the inside out. We had absolute proof of premeditation, collusion, extortion, and international wire fraud. I looked at the clock on my wall. It was nearly midnight. We had gathered an overwhelming mountain of digital evidence. We had Richard live cryptocurrency theft, and we had Brenda written confessions. Now it was time to spring our final trap and make them both pay for destroying my family trust. I took a deep breath. Done. I took a deep breath. Done. But Jamal did not move away from the screen. He kept his eyes locked on the live mirror feed of the iPad. He pointed at the display where Richard was minimizing his cryptocurrency wallet setup. Jamal told me setting up a digital wallet was only the first half of a getaway plan. He said we needed to know his final destination, because if he slipped into a country without an extradition treaty with the United States, even the federal government could not drag him back. I watched the screen intently as Richard opened a new tab on the secure browser. He navigated to the web version of a highly encrypted messaging application. Because I had full root access to the device, my keylogger silently captured his master password the absolute second he typed it in. The screen loaded, revealing his private chat interface. He was not messaging anyone in our family, he was talking to the criminal underworld. Jamal leaned forward, and we read the most recent conversation thread. It was with a contact saved under the name Donovan. The tone of the messages was incredibly aggressive and threatening. Donovan was clearly a high-level loan shark. He had sent Richard a message earlier that day saying, "Time is up, Richard. You owe $450,000 by the end of the week. If the money is not in our accounts by Friday, we are not going to break your legs. We are going to put you in the ground. Do not try to run." Richard had just typed his reply. We watched the words appear on our monitor in real time as his fingers hit the keys in Dubai. Richard wrote, "Relax, Donovan. The funds are currently sitting in the Cayman Islands holding account. The compliance hold drops in less than 48 hours. The second the money clears, I am converting your cut into untraceable digital currency and transferring it directly to your ledger. You will have your money." Jamal let out a low whistle of disbelief. He said Richard did not manipulate your mother-in-law to fund a luxury retirement. He manipulated her because he had a massive bounty on his own head. He used Brenda as a disposable pawn to save his own life. But the horror of Richard's betrayal did not stop there. We watched as Richard closed the chat with the loan shark and opened another conversation. This one was with a woman named Brittany. The messages were filled with romantic emojis and affectionate nicknames. Brittany asked him how the vacation with the old lady was going. Richard's response was so incredibly cold and calculated that it made my stomach physically turn. He typed out a long paragraph explaining his ultimate exit strategy. He told Brittany that Brenda was completely oblivious to his actual plans. He said she is currently down at the hotel spa picking out massage treatments and thinking we are going yacht shopping tomorrow. She is so desperate for affection that she signed the federal wire forms without asking a single intelligent question. The Mark bought it completely. Brittany replied, asking how he planned to escape without Brenda noticing the money was gone. We watched Richard type his final sickening message. He wrote, "I already booked a private charter flight to Montenegro for early Friday morning. The flight is under a fake passport name and it is just for me." Montenegro has absolutely no extradition treaty with the United States. I linked the Dubai luxury hotel suite to one of the credit cards tied to the frozen trust account. By the time the hotel management realizes the card is going to decline and the offshore bank hold clears, I will already be in the air with the crypto wallet keys in my pocket. The old woman will be left completely stranded in a foreign country, holding a massive hotel bill she cannot pay. When the federal agents finally track the stolen money, they are going to find her sitting alone in a hotel room. She is going to take the entire fall for the federal fraud. See you in Europe next week. Richard closed the browser and the iPad screen went dark. He had locked the device and likely left the suite. Jamal stood up straight, his eyes blazing with intense legal determination. He said Richard thinks he has outsmarted everyone, but he just handed us the entire playbook. We are going to lock that money down so hard that Richard will not be able to buy a bottle of water, let alone a private flight to Europe. I turned back to my keyboard and immediately prepared my secure computer network system, fully ready to strike. I pulled up a highly secure encrypted email client and began attaching the massive files we had just harvested. Jamal paced behind me, his mind already shifting from discovery mode into a ruthless legal offensive. He said we are completely done playing games with the local police department. They wanted a civil dispute, but we are going to hand them a massive federal financial terrorism case. He told me that our new primary target was not the Seattle police, but the highest levels of the federal financial regulatory system. I asked him exactly who we were going to contact. Jamal stopped pacing and placed his hands flat on my desk. He said we are going straight to the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau and the Primary Fraud Investigations Unit at Chase Bank headquarters. We are going to bypass the branch manager and the local detectives entirely. When the CFPB receives undeniable proof of elder coercion, wire fraud, and international cryptocurrency laundering, they do not just politely ask the bank to freeze the funds. They drop an absolute hammer on the entire financial institution until the money is locked in a federal vault. I nodded and began organizing the attachments. I created 3 distinct folders. The first folder contained the GPS tracking data from Lily Apple AirTag, proving their exact physical location at the luxury hotel in Dubai. The second folder held the synchronized text messages from the iPad, proving the premeditated extortion and Richard crushing debt to the loan shark. The third and most devastating folder contained the screen recordings of Richard setting up the offshore cryptocurrency wallet and his written confession about fleeing to Montenegro on a private charter flight. Jamal pulled out his laptop and began drafting the emergency legal briefs to accompany my digital evidence. He was typing with a fierce intensity. He explained that we needed to frame this exactly right. We were not just asking for a reversal of a joint account withdrawal. We were officially reporting an active international money laundering syndicate. By using specific federal keywords, we would automatically trigger the Patriot Act anti-money laundering protocols. Jamal said the second the bank algorithms flag those specific federal violations, the Cayman Islands offshore account will instantly freeze. They will not be able to move a single cent. I asked Jamal what would happen to Brenda once the accounts were frozen. I wanted to make sure she did not just get a slap on the wrist. I wanted her to feel the exact same terror she had inflicted on me and my daughter. Jamal looked up from his screen and his eyes were cold and uncompromising. He told me that Brenda was about to experience the harshest reality check of her entire life. He said once the money is frozen, Richard is going to panic. He owes a loan shark nearly $500,000, and his only lifeline will be cut. He will abandon her in Dubai the second he realizes the cash is gone. Jamal continued explaining the trap. He said Brenda will be left alone in a foreign country, with a hotel bill she cannot pay, and credit cards that will decline at every single terminal. But that is only the beginning. Because she signed the wire transfer documents, she is technically the primary suspect for the federal fraud. When she finally manages to beg her way back to the United States, federal agents will be waiting for her at the airport. She will face massive fines and years in federal prison for defrauding a minor trust fund. She wanted a luxury retirement, but she is going to get a concrete cell. I felt a deep sense of absolute vindication washing over me. This was no longer just about recovering David life insurance money. This was about completely destroying the people who thought they could prey on my grief and steal from my innocent child. I finished uploading the encrypted folders to Jamal's secure legal portal. I watched as the progress bar hit 100%. The evidence was officially packaged and ready for deployment. Jamal hit the send button on his laptop, transmitting the emergency briefs and the digital evidence directly to his high-level contacts at the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau and the Bank Executive Fraud Division. He closed his laptop with a loud, definitive snap. He looked at me and said, "The federal machine is officially in motion, Natalie. By the time the sun comes up, the entire international banking network is going to slam its doors right in their faces. Now all we have to do is sit back and wait for the absolute chaos to unfold overseas." They thought they had outsmarted a grieving widow, but they stepped right into a completely inescapable legal and financial trap. I turned back to my keyboard and immediately prepared my secure computer network system, fully ready to strike. Jamal pointed at the receipt. He said one piece was missing. A joint account holder cannot drain an $850,000 trust without triggering a strict secondary authorization protocol. There had to be a forged document to bypass limits. I searched the iPad directory for PDF documents and signatures. Within moments, the system isolated a hidden folder labeled legal. I opened the folder and gasped loudly. Richard had not just manipulated Brenda to agree to the theft. He was a mastermind of document forgery. Displayed brightly on my monitor was a highly sophisticated fake addendum to the original trust document. It explicitly claimed that I had granted Brenda full unilateral control over the assets due to my supposed mental instability following David's sudden death. The fraudulent document featured my signature perfectly replicated at the very bottom of the page. I turned and told Jamal that I never signed anything remotely resembling this paperwork. Jamal leaned in close and analyzed the fake signature on the screen. He told me to check the hidden metadata of the PDF file to see its origin. I ran the properties scanner, and the results were undeniable. The document was created on Richard's personal laptop 3 days before Brenda even asked to be added to the joint account. He had downloaded a high-resolution image of my signature from a charity event registry and digitally spliced it onto the fraudulent addendum. But the real smoking gun was discovered in an audio note Brenda had recorded on the iPad and texted to Richard. I clicked and played the audio file out loud. Brenda's voice filled the room, sounding hesitant and terrified. She told Richard she was too scared to submit the fake document to the bank teller. Richard replied with a vicious voice message threatening to expose her past financial mistakes to the family and leave her completely broke if she did not hand the forged paper over immediately. Jamal's eyes lit up with intense legal fire. He said this is absolute textbook coercion and aggravated identity theft. He immediately opened a secure portal to the federal court electronic filing system on his laptop. He told me he was not going to wait for morning to submit this massive evidence to a regular clerk. He had the personal contact information for a federal magistrate judge who exclusively handled emergency international financial freezes. Jamal drafted a highly aggressive temporary restraining order and a formal emergency injunction to halt all movement of the funds currently held in the Cayman Islands. He attached the metadata report, the forged trust addendum, and the audio recordings of Richard threatening Brenda into submission. He hit the submit button and dialed the federal magistrate direct phone number. It was well past midnight, but Jamal did not care about the late hour. He spoke into his phone with absolute authority, explaining that a flight risk criminal was currently executing an international money laundering operation using a forged trust document. I listened carefully as the judge asked a few rapid-fire questions regarding jurisdiction. Jamal answered each one flawlessly with precise legal citations, pointing directly to the digital evidence we had just uploaded to the secure court server. After 10 tense minutes, Jamal hung up the phone and let out a massive sigh of relief. He looked at me and smiled a cold, satisfied smile. He said the judge officially granted the emergency injunction. The order has already been transmitted directly to the federal banking regulators and the International Compliance Division. The ultimate fraud flag is officially planted inside the global banking network. The Cayman Islands Bank is legally bound to freeze the account instantly upon receiving the federal order. They absolutely cannot release the funds to Richard's private cryptocurrency wallet. The money is locked down tight, and neither of them can touch a single penny. I leaned back in my chair, feeling a heavy weight completely lift off my chest. We had finally done it. We had beaten them at their own despicable game. We had officially secured Lily Future and trapped Richard in an inescapable financial cage. The justice system worked because we aggressively forced it to work, using undeniable proof. Jamal stood up and walked over to the window, looking out at the dark, quiet street below. He said, "Tomorrow morning is going to be incredibly ugly for them, Natalie. When that Cayman bank opens for business, Richard is going to realize his exit strategy just evaporated into thin air. He is going to be trapped in Dubai with a woman he absolutely despises and a ruthless loan shark breathing down his neck. The arrogant hunter has officially become the desperate hunted." Halfway across the world, the blistering afternoon sun beat down on the massive glass windows of the Dubai Mall. Inside the exclusive VIP suite of an internationally renowned jewelry boutique, the air was perfectly chilled and smelled of expensive oud perfume. Brenda sat on a plush velvet sofa, sipping a glass of complimentary champagne. She was wearing a brand new designer silk dress, purchased just 2 hours earlier. A sharply dressed sales associate stood in front of her, wearing white cotton gloves and carefully displaying a breathtaking diamond and sapphire necklace on a black velvet tray. Brenda reached out and traced the sparkling stones with her manicured finger. She let out a soft sigh of absolute contentment. This was the exact lifestyle she had always believed she was inherently entitled to. She looked at her reflection in the full-length mirror and smiled. In her mind, she was not a thief. She was a grieving mother who had finally taken control of her own destiny. She rationalized the theft, believing I was too obsessed with my career to appreciate David's wealth. She convinced herself that Lily would be just fine, and that this luxury was her rightful compensation for a lifetime of maternal sacrifice. While Brenda was lost in her own arrogant delusions, Richard was standing near the back of the boutique, completely ignoring the diamonds. He was pacing back and forth on the thick Persian rug, his eyes glued to the screen of his smartphone. Despite the freezing air conditioning in the VIP suite, a thick bead of sweat rolled down the side of his neck. He violently chewed on his thumbnail and aggressively refreshed the secure web browser for the 20th time in the last 5 minutes. The screen loaded slowly, pulling up the offshore banking portal for the Cayman Islands. The status bar next to the $850,000 wire transfer still glowed in a bright, annoying yellow. It still read pending compliance review. Richard gritted his teeth and shoved the phone into his jacket pocket. He looked across the room at Brenda and felt a deep wave of absolute revulsion. He hated the way she laughed. He hated the way she drank her champagne. He hated the fact that he had to pretend to love this incredibly gullible woman just to save his own life. Richard knew the timeline was incredibly tight. The banking hours in the Caribbean were just opening. The automatic hold was scheduled to lift in less than 30 minutes. The absolute second that yellow pending icon turned into a green cleared icon, he was going to execute the final phase of his escape. He had the decentralized cryptocurrency wallet address copied to his clipboard ready to paste. He had his fake passport tucked securely into his breast pocket. His private charter flight to Montenegro was scheduled to depart from a private airstrip on the edge of the city in exactly 3 hours. His phone vibrated violently in his pocket. He pulled it out and saw a new encrypted message from Donovan the loan shark. The message was short and terrifying. It read, "My patience is completely gone, Richard. You have 1 hour to send the ledger confirmation, or I am sending my guys to your hotel room. We know exactly where you are." Richard's fingers trembled as he typed a response promising the transfer was minutes away. He wiped the sweat from his forehead and forced a completely fake, relaxed smile onto his face as Brenda called out to him from across the boutique. She held the massive diamond necklace up to her throat and looked at him through the mirror. She asked him what he thought of the piece. She announced to the sales associate that the necklace was a mere $150,000 absolute pocket change for her newfound status. She laughed and told Richard that David would have absolutely loved to see her wearing something so elegant. Richard walked over and placed his hands on her shoulders, massaging them gently. He looked at her reflection and lied through his teeth. He told her she looked absolutely magnificent and that she deserved to buy the matching earrings as well. He wanted her distracted. He wanted her absorbed in the illusion of limitless wealth so she would not notice when he walked out the front door to grab a taxi. Brenda giggled like a schoolgirl and turned to the sales associate. She confidently handed over the heavy metal credit card directly tied to the stolen funds. The impeccably dressed clerk bowed politely, taking the card and walking over to the sleek payment terminal resting on a glass display case. Richard took a slow step back toward the exit of the boutique, preparing his quiet escape. He pulled his phone out one last time and refreshed the offshore portal, holding his breath and waiting for the money to finally drop into his absolute control. The clerk inserted Brenda's card into the machine and pressed the processing button, waiting for the approval. Back in Seattle, while the clerk in Dubai waited for the payment terminal to process the massive charge, I was staring at my own computer screen. Jamal was pacing the hardwood floor behind me, waiting for the federal judge order to officially hit the banking network. But I knew government bureaucracy moved at a glacial pace. Even with an emergency injunction, a human compliance officer at the bank still had to physically read the legal order, verify the signatures, and manually lock the account. Richard was seconds away from executing his cryptocurrency transfer. The offshore banking hours had just opened. I could not afford to wait for a human being to process paperwork to save Lily's future. I needed to trigger an automated systemic lockdown that would bypass all human intervention. I told Jamal to stop pacing and come look at my monitor. I explained that Brenda might have convinced the local branch manager to add her name as a joint signer on the front end of the account, but she possessed absolutely zero knowledge of how the digital backend was structured. When David and I first set up the life insurance trust years ago, I personally built the online profile from the ground up. I established myself as the master system administrator. Brenda never knew how to remove my root access, and the bank tellers never bothered to check the digital hierarchy during an in-person transaction. She thought she was in complete control, but she was actually operating inside a digital cage I had built. I logged directly into the master administrative portal of our banking institution. I bypassed the standard consumer interface that regular customers use and accessed the deep routing controls. The $850,000 wire transfer to the Cayman Islands was sitting right there on my screen, still flashing its yellow pending status. I clicked on the transaction details, opening the Advanced Security Options menu. I did not click the standard cancel or dispute buttons, because those just send a low priority alert to the customer service department. Instead, I scrolled down to the federal compliance section. I explained to Jamal exactly what I was about to do. I told him I was going to use the Patriot Act against them. Following the events of the early 2000s, the federal government forced all international banking institutions to install highly sensitive automated algorithms. These algorithms are specifically designed to detect and immediately halt money laundering and terrorism financing. If a transaction is flagged with specific severe violation codes, the system completely overrides human authorization. It drops a global freeze on every single asset tied to the users to prevent capital flight. My fingers hovered over the keyboard. I manually overrode the transaction classification. I typed in the specific alphanumeric federal codes for suspected international money laundering and illicit offshore asset conversion. I linked the flag directly to Richard's name, citing his geographical location in the Middle East and his documented attempt to route the cleared funds into an untraceable, decentralized cryptocurrency exchange. It was the perfect digital storm. It painted a picture of a massive criminal enterprise moving illicit funds across borders. I took a deep breath and slammed my finger down on the enter key. The system did not ask for a confirmation prompt. The response was instantaneous and absolutely devastating. The yellow pending icon on my screen vanished. It was immediately replaced by a flashing bright red symbol. A severe system error message popped up stating that a critical federal compliance violation had been triggered. I watched the screen as the automated algorithm ruthlessly executed its programming. It completely locked the Cayman Islands holding account, rendering the funds utterly inaccessible to anyone including Richard. But the algorithm did not stop there. Because Brenda was listed as the primary initiator of the flagged transaction, the system cascaded the freeze backward. It locked her primary checking account. It locked her personal savings account. It instantly deactivated every single credit card associated with her name and social security number across the entire globe. Jamal stared at the red flashing screen in pure awe. He let out a breathless laugh. He said what you just did was drop a digital nuclear bomb on their entire lives. You financially erased them from the global banking system. They cannot withdraw cash, they cannot buy a plane ticket, and they certainly cannot pay for a luxury jewelry shopping spree. Half a world away, the payment terminal was about to deliver the absolute worst news of Brenda life. We had successfully cut the strings, and now we just had to wait for the entire operation to crash. Jamal stepped away from my glowing monitors and pulled his cell phone from his pocket. Freezing the money was the critical first step, but Jamal was determined to ensure that Richard never had the opportunity to run another scam for the rest of his life. He looked at me and said, "The financial cage is locked, but now we need to drop the physical cage right on top of him." Jamal scrolled through his contacts and dialed a direct, secure line. He put the phone on speaker and set it on my desk. The line clicked and a deep voice answered, identifying himself as Special Agent Vance from the Federal Bureau of Investigation, White Collar Crimes Division. Jamal did not waste a single second with pleasantries. He immediately identified himself and stated that he was securely transmitting a massive evidentiary package regarding an active international wire fraud and extortion ring. I watched Jamal hit the send button on his encrypted laptop portal. The folders containing Richard's private WhatsApp conversations, the threats from the loan shark, and his detailed confession about fleeing to Montenegro were instantly transferred to the federal database. Jamal explained to Agent Vance that the primary suspect was currently on the ground in Dubai and had booked a private charter flight to a non-extradition country scheduled to depart in less than 3 hours. Jamal emphasized that Richard was heavily indebted to organized crime and was attempting to launder stolen funds from a minor trust account through a decentralized cryptocurrency exchange. Agent Vance's tone shifted immediately from casual professional to high alert. I could hear the sound of furious typing echoing through the speakerphone as he opened the files we had just sent. He read the chat logs out loud, verifying the flight details and the fake passport name Richard intended to use. Agent Vance told Jamal that this was a textbook case of aggravated international flight to avoid prosecution, coupled with major financial crimes. He said, "Jamal, you handed us this case on a silver platter. I am escalating this to the director level immediately." Because Richard was currently operating outside of United States soil, local federal agents could not simply kick down his hotel room door. They needed international cooperation. Agent Vance explained the exact protocol. He said he was immediately drafting an emergency request to Interpol headquarters in Lyon, France. Based on the undeniable proof of extortion and money laundering, the FBI was requesting an immediate red notice to be issued for Richard's arrest. The red notice would instantly alert the local law enforcement agencies in the United Arab Emirates. Jamal leaned over the desk and asked Agent Vance about the timeline. He wanted to make sure the local authorities in Dubai would move fast enough to intercept Richard before he reached the private airstrip. Agent Vance chuckled a cold, hard sound that radiated absolute confidence. He told us that the authorities in Dubai do not take kindly to foreign nationals conducting illicit financial operations within their borders. He assured Jamal that the second the red notice hit the international database, Richard's fake passport and his real biometric data would be flagged across every single security checkpoint in the city. If he tried to step foot inside an airport or cross any border, he would be swarmed by armed police. I leaned closer to the phone and asked Agent Vance what would happen to Brenda. She was technically the primary account holder who initiated the fraudulent wire transfer, but she was completely oblivious to Richard's escape plan. Agent Vance told me that Brenda would be treated as an active co-conspirator until proven otherwise. Because her financial assets were completely frozen by the Patriot Act trigger I had just initiated, she would not be able to leave the country on her own. He said the local authorities would likely locate her at the luxury hotel and detain her for questioning regarding the stolen funds. Once she was processed, they would coordinate her eventual extradition back to the United States to face federal charges. Agent Vance thanked Jamal for the impeccable investigative work. He told us that our combination of digital forensic tracking and aggressive legal filing was something he usually only saw in high-level corporate espionage cases. He promised to keep his secure line open for any live updates and assured us that his team was monitoring the situation in real time. The call disconnected, leaving my home office in a tense but triumphant silence. Jamal picked up his phone and slid it back into his pocket. He looked at me with a fierce, proud expression. He said the Interpol net is officially cast, Natalie. Richard thinks he is a mastermind, but he is walking straight into a highly coordinated international ambush. I sat back in my chair, feeling the adrenaline slowly morph into a deep sense of peace. For the first time since David passed away, I felt completely in control of my family destiny. I had protected my daughter, and I had unleashed the full force of global justice against the people who tried to ruin us. They thought they could commit a flawless crime and disappear into the sunset, but they failed to realize that every action leaves a digital trace. We had turned their own stolen devices and their own arrogance into the very weapons that would dismantle their lives completely. The adrenaline of the night finally began to wear off as the first light of dawn crept through my home office window. We had stayed awake for over 20 hours executing our digital and legal counterattack. Jamal closed his encrypted laptop and rubbed his tired eyes, The federal financial freeze was firmly in place, and the Interpol red notice was officially circulating through the international security systems. There was absolutely nothing left for us to do but wait for the inevitable collapse. I walked into the kitchen and brewed a strong pot of dark roast coffee. The quiet hum of the coffee maker felt incredibly grounding after the high-stakes cyber warfare we had just waged against my own family. I poured 2 large mugs and carried them into the living room where Jamal was sitting on the sofa. He had connected my computer to the large television screen mounted on the wall. The glowing map of Dubai was projected across the 75-inch display. A small bright green dot was resting perfectly still over the luxury hotel complex. That little green dot represented the tracking coin from Lily Teddy Bear hiding deep inside Brenda designer handbag. I handed Jamal his coffee and sat down next to him. We both stared at the screen in total silence, letting the hot caffeine wake our exhausted bodies. I checked the digital clock resting on the television stand. The 72-hour compliance window for the Cayman Islands offshore account was officially closing right at this exact moment. Right at this very second, the automated banking systems were attempting to process the $850,000 wire transfer. I knew exactly what was happening on the digital backend. The system was hitting the hard federal block I had aggressively initiated. The money was slamming into an impenetrable digital wall, bouncing back and triggering the complete financial freeze across every single one of Brenda-affiliated accounts. Jamal took a slow sip of his coffee and smiled a sharp, satisfied smile. He pointed at the television screen and told me to imagine the sheer panic setting in halfway across the world. He said Richard is likely refreshing his secure banking portal right now, expecting to see his massive payout clear into his hidden wallet. Instead, he is being met with a blazing red error screen, locking him out completely. He is realizing that his cryptocurrency getaway plan is completely dead in the water. The loan shark Donovan is still waiting for his massive cut, and Richard has absolutely nothing to give him. He is completely out of options and rapidly running out of time. Suddenly, the glowing green dot on the television screen blinked and shifted slightly to the left. Jamal sat up straight and quickly set his coffee mug down on the glass coffee table. I leaned forward, resting my elbows on my knees and holding my breath. The dot moved away from the luxury hotel complex and merged onto the main digital highway of the map. It was traveling at a steady, fast speed, indicating that they were inside a moving vehicle. But the trajectory was not pointing toward the luxury yacht marina or the high-end shopping districts they had bragged about in their text messages. The green dot was moving in a direct straight line straight toward the main terminal of the Dubai International Airport. Richard was officially making his desperate run for it. He had seen the frozen account status and immediately abandoned his fake romance. He was likely manipulating Brenda into following him to the airport under the guise of an impromptu trip, or simply planning to ditch her at the curb the second they arrived. He thought his fake passport and his private chartered flight to Montenegro were going to save him from the terrifying wrath of his dangerous creditors. He had absolutely no idea that the moment he stepped foot inside that airport terminal, he was going to trigger a massive international police response. He thought he was escaping to freedom, but he was driving directly into an armed trap. We sat in my living room completely mesmerized by the glowing green dot inching across the map. The tension in the room was incredibly thick. The calm before the storm was officially over. We knew that the absolute second Richard tried to scan his documents at the private aviation checkpoint, the Interpol system would sound the alarm. We were eagerly waiting for the inevitable explosion to finally happen right now, this very exact moment. The green dot on my television screen reached the icon representing the Dubai International Airport and came to a complete halt. Jamal and I sat on the sofa staring at the display for several hours. We waited for a news alert or a phone call from Agent Vance, but the morning slowly dragged into the afternoon and faded into night. The adrenaline fueling our relentless counterattack finally began draining from our bodies. Jamal retreated to the guest bedroom to get some desperately needed sleep. I moved back to my home office, leaving the tracking map running on my monitors. I rested my heavy head against my desk, intending to close my eyes for a few brief minutes. A sudden harsh ringing noise shattered the absolute silence of the house. I jolted awake, gasping for air. My cell phone was vibrating violently across the hard wooden surface of my desk. I blinked furiously, trying to clear my blurry vision, and glanced at the glowing digital clock on my computer monitor. It was exactly 3 in the morning now. The house was completely dark, except for the blue light radiating from my screens. I reached out and grabbed my phone. I looked down at the caller identification screen, and my heart instantly skipped a beat. It was a remarkably long string of digits, indicating an incoming international call originating directly from the United Arab Emirates. A slow, cold smile spread across my face. The inevitable explosion we had been waiting for had finally detonated. I hit the green accept button, placed the phone right in the center of my desk, and turned the speakerphone volume all the way up to its maximum setting. Before I could even speak a single word, a loud, piercing shriek erupted from the small speaker. It was Brenda. She was crying hysterically, her voice cracking and trembling with pure, unadulterated terror. The arrogant, entitled tone she used just days prior was gone. She sounded like a trapped animal. She screamed my name over and over again. She yelled, "Natalie, please tell me you are there. You have to answer me. You have to help me right now." She was hyperventilating, gasping for air between her frantic, panicked sentences. The background noise on her end of the line was chaotic. I could hear the distinct sound of a busy hotel lobby and foreign voices speaking sharply in the distance. I leaned back in my chair and did not say a word. I let the silence force her to confront her own absolute desperation. Brenda let out a loud, agonizing sob. She screamed into the receiver, saying, "Natalie, my cards are declining. Every single one of them is being rejected." I was at the jewelry boutique and the payment machine started flashing red. The sales clerk looked at me like I was a common criminal. They actually threatened to call the local security guards on me. I had to leave the diamond necklace on the counter and run out of the store. She paused, taking a ragged breath as her panic escalated with every single word. She continued her frantic rant, explaining that she immediately took a taxi back to her luxury hotel to figure out the banking issue. But the situation there was infinitely worse. Brenda cried out, saying the hotel manager locked me out of my suite, Natalie. My electronic room key just beeped red and would not open the door. When I went down to the front desk, they already had all of my luggage sitting behind the counter. They presented me with an $80,000 bill for the room and damages. They demanded immediate payment, but my credit cards are dead. They told me I am permanently flagged for severe international fraud in their banking system. I heard the heavy footsteps of Jamal rushing down the hallway. The loud screaming had woken him up. He walked into my home office, tying his robe and looking instantly alert. He saw the international number glowing on the phone screen and walked over to stand beside me. He crossed his arms over his chest and listened intently as his mother-in-law completely unraveled. Brenda was actively begging and sobbing loudly now. She pleaded with me, saying, "Natalie, you have to call the Seattle branch manager right this second. There has been a massive, terrible mistake made. You have to tell them that I am the joint account holder and that the transfer was perfectly legal. Tell them to lift the federal fraud freeze immediately. The local police officers are standing right here in the hotel lobby looking at me. They are holding my passport, Natalie. They are not letting me leave the building. Please, just call the bank and fix this glitch before they arrest me." I sat in my home office, the blue glow of the monitors reflecting off Jamal's tense face. On the desk, the phone was a conduit for pure, unadulterated misery. Brenda was no longer just crying. She was howling, a sound of primitive realization that she had been hunted, trapped, and discarded by the very man she thought was her ticket to a new life. She gasped for air, her voice cracking as she delivered the ultimate twist in her own tragic story. "Natalie, he is gone. Richard is gone." I woke up from my nap to go to the spa, and when I came back to the suite to get my robe, the room was empty. His suitcases, his expensive suits, even the silver watch David gave him for Christmas. Everything is gone. I leaned forward, my voice as cold as a mountain stream. I asked her what she meant by everything. Brenda let out a choked sob that sounded like she was physically gagging on her own regret. She screamed that Richard had not just taken his own things. He had gone into the hidden wall safe while she was in the shower. He took her primary passport. He took the emergency cash envelope she had hidden in her vanity. He even took her diamond engagement ring while she was asleep. But the most devastating part of his betrayal was yet to come. Brenda's voice dropped to a terrified whisper. He left a note on this pillow, Natalie. He said he was going to the airport to check on our private flight, but when I called the charter company, they told me the flight was canceled hours ago. They said the credit card on file was declined for suspicious activity. Richard knew. He knew the money was frozen before I did. He took my only form of identification and left me here with nothing. Jamal shook his head, a grim smile touching his lips. He leaned over the phone and asked Brenda if she had checked the hotel bill. Brenda shrieked in response, the sound echoing through my quiet office. She cried that the hotel manager was standing outside her door with 2 armed security guards. They had presented her with a final itemized bill for $80,000. It covered the presidential suite, the vintage champagne, the room service, and the luxury car rentals Richard had insisted on. Brenda pleaded with us, her words tumbling out in a frantic, incoherent mess. She said, "Natalie, you have to help me. I have no passport. I have no money. I have no way to get to the embassy. If I do not pay this bill by morning," the manager said, "he is calling the Dubai police to have me transported to a debtor prison. You know how strict the laws are here. I will never get out. Please just send a wire for the hotel bill. I will give you back every penny when I get home. I promise on David's memory." I felt a surge of cold, righteous fury at the mention of my late husband's name. I looked at the tracking map on my monitor. The green dot from Lily's AirTag was still stationary at the airport. Richard was likely stuck at a security gate, unaware that we were watching his every move. I told Brenda that she had no right to speak David's name. I reminded her that she was the one who used his death as a cover to rob his daughter. I told her that she wasn't a victim of Richard. She was his partner in crime until he decided she was no longer useful. I explained that I wasn't going to send a single cent to Dubai. I told her that the $80,000 bill was her burden to carry, just like the grief she had forced upon me was mine. Brenda began to wail, a high-pitched, thin sound of absolute despair. She realized that the outsider she had mocked was now her only lifeline, and that lifeline was being pulled away. She screamed that she was her mother, that family was supposed to stick together no matter what. I looked at Jamal, who gave me a sharp nod of approval. I spoke into the phone one last time, my voice steady and unwavering. I told Brenda that she had defined the terms of our relationship at the bank. She had decided that I was a stranger. Now I was simply honoring her wish. I told her to enjoy the consequences of her choices. Then I reached out and tapped the end call button, cutting her off in the middle of a desperate, gut-wrenching plea for mercy. The silence that followed was the most beautiful thing I had heard in months. We sat there in the dark, watching the green dot on the screen, waiting for the final domino to fall. Richard thought he was the one making the getaway, but he had no idea that the Interpol net was about to tighten around his throat. The silence on the other end of the line was heavy, broken only by Brenda's ragged, wet gasps. I took a slow, deliberate sip of my coffee, feeling the warmth of the mug against my palms. I looked at the digital clock on my wall. In Seattle, it was the dead of night, but in Dubai, Brenda's world was ending in the high heat of the afternoon. I spoke into the speakerphone, my voice dropping into a low, clinical tone. "You know, Brenda, it is funny how quickly the definition of family changes when your bank account hits zero. Just 4 days ago, you stood in my living room and told me I was a temporary fixture. You said David's money was your compensation for the burden of raising him. You called me an outsider. So I am curious, why are you calling a complete stranger to pay an $80,000 hotel bill?" Brenda let out a high-pitched, strangled cry. "Natalie, please, I was emotional. I didn't mean those things. Richard, he got into my head. He told me you were going to cut me off. I was just trying to protect myself." I didn't let her finish. I leaned closer to the phone, my eyes fixed on the live data feed still scrolling across my secondary monitor. Stop lying, Brenda. It is insulting to both of us. I know about the villa in Dubai you picked out a week before David's funeral. I have the emails you sent to the real estate agent calling David's life insurance your inheritance. I know you spent your flight here drinking champagne and laughing about how easy it was to manipulate a grieving widow. There was a sharp, audible gasp on the other end. Brenda's voice turned small and trembling. How could you possibly know that I let a small, cold smile touch my lips? You stole a rooted cybersecurity testing device from my closet, Brenda. You thought it was just an old iPad, but it has been transmitting every single search, every text, and every keystroke back to my server in real time. I have been watching you and Richard play house with my daughter's future for the last 72 hours. I paused, letting that sink in. I wanted her to feel the crushing weight of being completely exposed. But here's the part you really need to hear, Brenda. While you were down at the spa picking out luxury treatments, I was watching Richard. I watched him through the iPad camera as he set up a private cryptocurrency wallet. I watched him copy the routing numbers to move the entire $850,000 into an account that only he can access. He never planned on buying a yacht with you. He was planning on leaving you at that hotel the absolute second the bank hold cleared. Brenda's voice was a barely audible whimper. No, he loves me. He said we were starting over. He doesn't love you, Brenda. He loves the $450,000 he owes to a loan shark named Donovan. I read his messages. He was planning to flee to Montenegro on a private charter flight this morning. He even left a fake passport in his bag. He was going to let you take the entire fall for the federal wire fraud while he disappeared into a country with no extradition treaty. He didn't just steal the money from me, Brenda. He stole it from you too. And then he took your passport so you couldn't follow him. The sound that came from the phone was a long, low wail of pure agony. It was the sound of a woman realizing she had traded her soul, her son's legacy, and her family's love for a man who viewed her as a disposable pawn. I continued, my voice unwavering. I am the one who flagged the accounts, Brenda. I used the Patriot Act to trigger a global freeze on everything tied to your name. You aren't just broke. You are a person of interest in an international money laundering investigation. The hotel manager isn't just holding your luggage. He is waiting for the Dubai police to arrive because your credit cards triggered a red-level fraud alert at the central bank. Natalie, please, Brenda sobbed. I'll give it back. I'll sign whatever you want. Just get me home. I can't go to jail here. I stood up from my desk and looked at Jamal, who was watching me with an expression of grim respect. I spoke my final words to the woman who had tried to ruin us. You had David's love, and you traded it for greed. You had a granddaughter who adored you, and you traded her for a grifter. You wanted to live like an empress on stolen blood money, so now you can live with the consequences. I am hanging up now, Brenda. Do not call this number again. I am an outsider, remember? And outsiders don't pay for the mistakes of criminals. I reached down and tapped the red icon on the screen. The line went dead, cutting off her final desperate shriek. The room was suddenly blissfully silent. I picked up my mug and finished the last of my coffee. It was cold, but I didn't care. The first part of the execution was complete. Now it was time to watch the second domino fall at the airport. Richard thought he was the master of the escape, but he was about to find out that there is no hiding from a mother who has already seen your soul through a digital lens. I could almost hear Brenda's brain trying to rewire itself, trying to find a loophole in the digital net I had woven around her. But there were no loopholes. There was only the cold, hard reality of her own choices. I took another slow sip of my coffee, the caffeine sharpening my focus. I looked at the secondary monitor, where the green dot from Lily's AirTag was still pulsing at the Dubai International Airport, but it had stopped moving. It was stationary in the high-security zone of the private aviation terminal. Brenda's voice came back as a broken, stuttering whisper. Natalie, you're lying. Richard wouldn't do that. He's just late. He's probably just stuck in traffic or dealing with the pilots. He's coming back for me. He has to. I leaned back in my chair, the leather creaking softly in the quiet room. You still don't get it, do you, Brenda? You were never his partner. You were his bank account. And now that the bank is closed, he has moved on to his next transaction. But there is one thing Richard didn't count on. He didn't count on the fact that I'm much better at his game than he is. I leaned forward, my voice dropping to a low, clinical tone. Brenda, do me a favor. If you're still standing in that hotel lobby, look out the large, floor-to-ceiling windows toward the main entrance. Or better yet, ask the hotel manager to turn on the news in the lobby. What? Brenda asked, her voice trembling. Why? What are you talking about? I watched the live Interpol update feed on my screen. A notification flashed in bright red: primary suspect intercepted at Terminal 3 private aviation gate. I spoke clearly into the phone. Because while you were crying to me, the Dubai police and Interpol agents were closing in on Richard at the departure gate. They didn't just find him, Brenda. They found him with your passport in his pocket, a fake ID under the name Marcus Thorne, and a ledger containing the private keys to a cryptocurrency wallet he thought was full of my daughter's money. A loud, chaotic noise erupted on Brenda's end of the line. I could hear shouting in Arabic and the heavy thud of boots on marble. Brenda shrieked, Natalie, there are men in suits here. They're showing the manager a picture. They're looking at me. That's Interpol, Brenda, I said, my voice devoid of emotion. And right about now at the airport, Richard is currently in handcuffs. He's being led away to a secure holding cell. He's not going to Montenegro. He's going to a federal processing center. And since he has your passport and the forged trust documents on him, he's likely already telling them that the whole thing was your idea. He's going to trade you for a lighter sentence before the sun goes down. Brenda began to wail, a high-pitched, thin sound of absolute terror. Natalie, please, you have to help me. I'll do anything. I'll give back the Porsche. I'll testify against him. Just send a wire for a plane ticket home. I can't stay here. If they take me to a Dubai prison, I'll die. Please, I'm your mother-in-law. I'm Lily's grandmother. I felt a surge of cold, righteous fury at the mention of my daughter's name. I looked at Jamal, who was standing by the window, his arms crossed, watching the dawn break over Seattle. I spoke my final words to the woman who had tried to steal our future. You should have thought about Lily when you were signing those forged documents, Brenda. You should have thought about being a grandmother when you were laughing about how easy I was to rob. You told me David's money belonged to you because you raised him. Well, a mother's first job is to protect her child. I'm doing exactly that. I'm protecting Lily's money from a predator. You wanted a luxury lifestyle in Dubai. Well, now you have it. Have fun in Dubai, Brenda. I hear the justice system there is very thorough. Natalie, no. Please. Brenda's voice was cut off as I calmly reached down and tapped the end call button. The silence that followed was absolute. I leaned back and closed my eyes, the weight of the last 72 hours finally beginning to lift. My phone sat silent on the desk, a black mirror reflecting the monitors. I had recovered the money, I had trapped the grifter, and I had left the traitor to face the consequences of her own greed. Lily's future was secure. Jamal turned from the window, a look of grim satisfaction on his face. We didn't need to say anything. The digital trail was closed, and the human one was headed for a cell. I stood up, walked to the kitchen, and started a new pot of coffee. The sun was finally up, and for the first time since David died, the air in my house felt clean. The early morning light was beginning to fill my living room in Seattle, casting long shadows across the floor where Jamal and I had spent the most grueling night of our lives. The international drama in Dubai was still unfolding, but for Jamal, the most painful confrontation was waiting just a few miles away. He stood up, adjusted his coat, and looked at me with a tired but resolute expression. He didn't need to say anything. We both knew the next domino to fall wasn't in a desert kingdom, but in the luxury suburban home he had shared with Samantha. Jamal drove to his house while I stayed behind monitoring the digital feeds. When he arrived, the silver Porsche Brenda had gifted Samantha was sitting in the driveway like a trophy of betrayal. He walked inside to find Samantha in the kitchen, casually scrolling through her phone, still oblivious to the fact that her mother's empire of sand had collapsed. She looked up, offering a smug smile, asking if he was back to his senses and ready to apologize to her family. Jamal didn't apologize. Instead, he pulled a thick envelope from his briefcase and slid it across the marble island. He told her to open it. Samantha's smirk faded as she pulled out the legal documents. They weren't just divorce papers. They were a comprehensive filing for full sole custody of their children, citing her active participation in a federal criminal conspiracy and her reckless association with international fugitives. Samantha's face turned a ghostly white. She stammered, claiming he was being ridiculous, that it was just a family dispute. But Jamal was prepared. He opened his laptop and played the synchronized text messages I had harvested from the rooted iPad. He showed her the logs where she had negotiated the Porsche as hush money, while her mother planned to rob a child. He showed her the messages where she encouraged Brenda to flee, promising to keep the secret for a price. Jamal's voice was a low, dangerous rumble. He told her that he had already reported the Porsche as stolen property to the insurance company and the federal authorities. He explained that by accepting that car as a bribe, she had legally become an accessory after the fact to grand larceny and wire fraud. He told her that if she fought him on the custody, he would personally testify against her in federal court and ensure she spent the next decade in a prison cell next to her mother. The realization hit Samantha like a physical blow. The golden child who had spent her life manipulating everyone around her suddenly found herself in a room with a man who could see through every one of her lies. She began to wail the same high-pitched, entitled scream her mother had used in the hotel lobby. She begged him to think of their life, their house, and their reputation. Jamal looked around the pristine, expensive kitchen and told her that a house built on the theft of a niece's future was not a home he wanted to live in. He informed her that he had already frozen their joint accounts and changed the locks on his law firm's satellite office. He told her she had 24 hours to pack her things and leave the house. Since the house was purchased with an inheritance from his own family, he was keeping it. As Jamal walked toward the door, Samantha chased after him, grabbing his arm and sobbing that she was sorry, that she would give the car back, that she would do anything to fix it. Jamal gently but firmly removed her hand. He told her that some things like trust and the safety of a child can't be fixed once they are broken. He told her that she had chosen a car over her brother's memory and a vacation over her niece's well-being. He walked out the front door and didn't look back. As he pulled out of the driveway, he saw Samantha through the large front window. She had collapsed onto the floor of the foyer, weeping into her hands. The house was quiet, expensive, and completely empty of the people who truly mattered. She was left with nothing but a stolen Porsche she couldn't drive and a mother she would likely never see outside of a prison visiting room. Jamal returned to my house an hour later. He looked older, more burdened, but his eyes were clear. He sat down at my kitchen table and we sat in silence for a long time. The domestic karma was complete. The family that had tried to isolate me and bankrupt my daughter had effectively dismantled itself through its own greed. We had won, but the victory felt heavy. I looked at the tracking map one last time. The green dot at the airport was gone, replaced by a status update from Agent Vance: suspect in custody. Processing initiated. The storm had passed, leaving behind the wreckage of a family that never really was. 2 weeks later, the morning air in Seattle felt crisp and final as I sat in Jamal's office watching a live flight tracker on his wall-mounted screen. This wasn't a vacation flight. This was an extradition. Brenda was currently 35,000 feet above the Atlantic, strapped into a middle seat between two federal marshals. The UAE authorities had wasted no time. Once they realized she was the primary signatory on a wire transfer flagged for international money laundering, they treated her like a high-level threat. She had spent the last 14 days in a Dubai detention center, a far cry from the silk sheets of the Burj Al Arab. Jamal leaned back in his leather chair, tapping a pen against a thick legal brief. He looked at me and said, "The U.S. attorney is ready, Natalie. They aren't just looking at the wire fraud. Because the money was explicitly tied to David's life insurance trust for Lily, they are adding charges for elder and child financial exploitation." In the eyes of the feds, Brenda didn't just steal money. She predated on a minor's legal inheritance. That carries a mandatory minimum that she isn't going to like. But the legal charges were only half of the destruction. As a cybersecurity expert, I knew that in our modern world, the court of public opinion moves faster than any judge's gavel. While Brenda was locked away in Dubai, I had ensured that the digital footprint of her betrayal was impossible to ignore. I hadn't leaked anything illegal, but the public records of the federal injunction and the Interpol Red Notice were now easily searchable. Brenda had spent decades carefully curating a reputation as a high society matriarch and a pillar of her local country club. She lived for the envy of her peers. But the news of her arrest for defrauding her own widowed daughter-in-law and orphaned granddaughter spread through her wealthy social circles like a wildfire. Her private social media groups, once filled with brunch photos and luxury travel tips, were now a battlefield of gossip and condemnation. I watched as the comment sections on local community forums turned toxic. Her friends were the first to turn on her, posting stories of her past greed and how they always felt something was off about her. The country club board had already sent a formal letter to her empty house unanimously terminating her membership for conduct unbecoming. Her name was being scrubbed from charity boards and gala guest lists. In the world Brenda valued most, she was already dead. Jamal's phone buzzed. He checked the message and looked up at me. "The plane just touched down at SeaTac," he said. "They are taking her through a private exit to avoid a scene, but the processing will be public record by noon. Samantha is already at the courthouse with a bail bondsman, but she's in for a shock. The judge is likely to designate Brenda as a high flight risk, given her recent attempt to hide in a non-extradition country. She isn't going home today." I felt a strange sense of calm. I didn't feel the need to go to the airport and gloat. I didn't need to see her in handcuffs to know that justice was being served. I thought about David and how he would feel seeing his mother in this position. He would have been heartbroken, but he would have been proud that I protected our daughter. Brenda had tried to use David's death as a currency, and in doing so, she had bankrupted her entire existence. Jamal stood up and grabbed his briefcase. "I have to head to the arraignment," he said. "Do you want to come?" I shook my head slowly. "No," I said, "I have a more important meeting. I'm taking Lily to the park. I'm done living in Brenda's drama." As I walked out of the office building, the Seattle sun felt warm on my face. The legal reality was that Brenda would likely spend her sunset years behind a different kind of gate than the ones she was used to. Her reputation was annihilated, her bank accounts were empty, and her family was fractured beyond repair. She had chased a life of luxury and ended up with a legacy of shame. I got into my car and headed home, ready to start the next section of our lives, one where the only people who mattered were the ones who truly loved us. The process of reclaiming what was stolen felt less like a sprint and more like a carefully orchestrated digital reconstruction. Within 30 days of the freeze, the legal wheels had turned far enough that the federal authorities released the hold on the $850,000. But I didn't just put it back into the same vulnerable account. I sat in Jamal's office one rainy Tuesday afternoon as we finalized the paperwork for the new structure. We established what Jamal called an ironclad trust. This wasn't a standard savings account that any silver-tongued relative could talk their way into. It was a multi-signature, tiered access legal fortress. For any withdrawal to occur, it now required the digital authorization of two independent parties, myself and Jamal, acting as the permanent legal trustee. We added a specific clause that prevented any changes to the trust structure until Lily reached the age of 25. I watched as the final wire transfer hit the new account, the numbers glowing in a steady, secure green on the screen. The money that David had worked so hard to leave behind was finally back where it belonged, protected by a layer of law and technology that no one in his family could ever hope to penetrate. But the restoration of the money was only part of the healing process. My performance during this entire crisis had not gone unnoticed at my cybersecurity firm. My manager, who had initially given me time off to grieve, had watched from the sidelines as I dismantled an international fraud ring using our proprietary tools and a rooted testing device. A week after the money was secured, he called me into his office for a formal review. He didn't talk about my billable hours or my recent leave. Instead, he talked about my strategic thinking and my ability to maintain operational security under extreme personal pressure. He told me that the firm was opening a new division focused on high-level private asset protection and family office security. He offered me the position of Director of Private Intelligence, complete with a significant salary increase and a seat on the executive board. My career, which Brenda and Samantha had mocked as a cold, tech-obsessed distraction, had become the very thing that saved my daughter's future and elevated my own. I walked out of that office feeling a sense of professional validation I had never experienced before. I realized that my independence and my skills weren't things I should apologize for. They were the foundation of my resilience. I was no longer the grieving widow that the vultures could pick at. I was a leader in my field, a protector of my home, and a woman who had stood alone against an entire family and won. The restoration extended to my home as well. I spent a weekend clearing out the guest room where Brenda had stayed. I donated the expensive bedding she had insisted on, and repainted the walls a vibrant, warm terracotta. I wanted every trace of her energy gone from my sanctuary. I replaced the hall closet where she had stolen the iPad with a new high-tech biometric safe where our truly important documents would live. Even the silence in the house had changed. It was no longer a heavy morning silence. It was a peaceful, productive quiet. I started cooking again, but this time it wasn't to please a demanding mother-in-law or to host a family that hated me. It was to teach Lily how to make her father's favorite lasagna. We laughed in the kitchen, and for the first time, the laughter didn't feel like a betrayal of David's memory. It felt like a tribute to it. Jamal stayed in close contact, serving as a pillar of support as we both navigated our new realities. He was still finalizing his divorce from Samantha, but he seemed lighter, more focused. He told me that standing up for me had been the catalyst he needed to realize he had been living a lie for years. We had both been restored, not just to our former positions, but to a better, more authentic version of ourselves. The money was safe, my career was thriving, and my home was finally a place of genuine peace. The reconstruction was complete. I had taken the wreckage that Brenda and Richard had left behind and used it to build something unbreakable. As I watched Lily do her homework at the kitchen table, I knew that the restoration wasn't just about the bank balance. It was about the fact that we were still standing stronger and more secure than we had ever been when David was alive. The storm had tried to wash us away, but all it did was clean the slate for a better future. Lily sat on the swing beside me, her small fingers busy braiding a crown of wildflowers. She looked up and waved as Jamal's car pulled into the driveway. He wasn't arriving as a lawyer today. He was coming as the brother David should have had. He carried a bag of charcoal and a box of steaks, a genuine smile lighting up his face. There was no tension in the air, no whispered schemes and no predatory eyes watching our every move. We were finally hosting the family barbecue we deserved, built on the solid foundation of trust rather than the shifting sands of manipulation. As Jamal started the grill and Lily ran across the lawn with the dog, I took a moment to look at the house. It was no longer a monument to what I had lost, but a fortress for what I had saved. I looked directly into the camera, my voice steady and layered with the hard-earned wisdom of the last few months. Blood doesn't make you family. Loyalty does. Brenda and Samantha thought that a shared last name gave them a license to bleed me dry. They saw my tears and thought they were a sign of surrender. They thought grief made me weak, but they were wrong. It made me lethal. It gave me a clarity that no predator can ever anticipate. I leaned back, watching my daughter's laughter echo through the trees. People like Richard and Brenda count on your silence. They count on the idea that you'll be too broken or too polite to fight back. They underestimate the quiet strength of a woman who has nothing left to lose but the future of her child. So let this be the final lesson for anyone who thinks they can prey on a mother's heart. Never underestimate a mother's instinct. We are the keepers of the gate, and we see the threats you haven't even thought of yet. I have my daughter, I have my career, and I have the peace that comes from knowing the villains are exactly where they belong. I caught Lily's eye and shared a secret knowing smile. And one more thing for the road. If you're planning a high-stakes international fraud, never ever leave your iPad around a 7-year-old. You might just find out that the smallest member of the family is the biggest threat to your empire. I picked up my glass, toasted to the empty space where the vultures used to sit, and turned back to the people who actually mattered. The game was over, and for the first time in a long time, I had already won. The most profound lesson from Natalie's ordeal is that resilience is built on the intersection of competence and boundaries. Throughout the story, the antagonists Brenda, Richard, and Samantha mistook Natalie's grief for a lack of awareness. They operated under the antiquated assumption that a mourning woman is a vulnerable target, someone whose emotional state would naturally cloud her technical and legal judgment. However, Natalie proved that professional expertise is not just a career tool, it is a personal shield. By leveraging her background in cybersecurity, Natalie transformed her domestic space from a crime scene into a digital trap. This shift highlights a modern reality. True protection requires both emotional and technical literacy. We often think of family peace as a reason to stay silent or overlook red flags. But Natalie demonstrated that true peace is only possible when it is defended by firm boundaries. She refused to let blood excuse betrayal, recognizing that loyalty is a choice, not a birthright. Furthermore, the story underscores the power of intergenerational observation. Lily's role as the spy reminds us that children are far more perceptive than we often give them credit for. By teaching her daughter the basics of security and observation, Natalie didn't just protect their finances, she empowered the next generation to recognize and react to manipulation. Ultimately, the narrative serves as a warning against underestimating the outsider. Natalie's strength did not come from a desire for revenge, but from a fierce commitment to her daughter's future. In a world where predators often use the guise of family to bypass our defenses, being lethal in the face of injustice is not a character flaw, it is a survival mechanism. Take the time today to audit your own digital and financial boundaries, ensuring that your future is protected by more than just trust.